I'll call the meeting to order then. We need some action items to adopt the agenda and approve the minutes from the May 18th meeting.
I move to adopt the agenda.
I second it.
Been moved and seconded. Those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye. How about the approval of the minutes? Did you have a chance to read them?
Move it up.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
So, this is the opportunity for the public to comment on any matter that's not on the agenda of the meeting and is within the jurisdiction of the Teachers' Retirement Board. However, the board may not take action on any issues raised unless it's included on the agenda and public comment has been allowed. If issues are raised that would require board action, and the issue would need to be included on the agenda for a future meeting. Public matter does not include disability applications or contested cases or other adjudicated proceedings. So we are on to, and do you have anything to say today? Our public is here, yay. On to the contested case of Zabrocki. This is the time we're going to deliberate regarding the matter of Edward Zabrocki's eligibility for retirement benefits. It's a contested case. Hearing and public comment will not be allowed. This board deliberation is not an opportunity for additional argument from either party of the contested case. Dan Chamberlain, our board member, was not present for the oral argument regarding Mr. Zabrocki's exceptions, and he will not participate in this deliberation regarding our final decision. The board members, other than Mr. Chamberlain, we've reviewed the hearing examiner's findings of fact and conclusions of law and recommended order, and have had access to the complete contested case record. We've also reviewed Mr. Zabrocki's exceptions to the hearing examiner's proposed order, TRS's response to Zabrocki's exceptions, and Mr. Zabrocki's reply to TRS's response. The board members heard oral arguments regarding Mr. Zabrocki's exceptions on May 18th, 2018. So this is the time to discuss the case and where we're going from here. Whether we want to adopt the recommended order or not.
Well, after looking through all of this stuff, I think it would be good if we would at least adopt the recommended order from February 5th document from him, the finding of facts, conclusion of law. But I think there's several issues that we want to talk about that may be improperly stated. Renumbering, that sort of thing. For example, finding of facts, paragraph citations were inaccurate between the two. But again, several other things we could talk about, but I believe we should adopt that order.
Clean up the typo of the date.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that after reading through everything, looking over the case materials, that by and large, well, not by and large, I guess I think we should also adopt the proposed order with some modifications. And I don't know how much detail we want to go into with regard to those modifications today. The one that I would want to talk a little bit more about is the statute of limitations issue. But maybe we should hear from everybody first on the bigger issue of whether or not you think there are some reasons that we should not adopt the proposed order.
There was another part, there's the conclusions of law that refer to 2011 TRS law versus 2007 instead of 2007. Is that anyone else?
Yeah.
To discuss that?
Yeah.
I think the issue with that is the difference between 2007 and 2011. There's no substantial difference between how the 2007 is applied here as opposed to the 2011, but it really should have been the 2007, that's for sure.
I think as long as we reference that, it should.
Could you speak louder, just a
I'm
little
sorry.
bit, thank you.
All of us?
Mostly Mr. Douglas, but I'll let you know. Thank you. Not that, but just thank you.
Should we hear from everyone on the bigger issue of whether or not to adopt?
It's my understanding that I'm really not supposed to comment,
I know that's hard for you.
correct? It is.
You've seen
There is a
them.
time out movie next door.
I feel as Jeff does that we should adopt that, the order.
With a few
With a
exceptions.
few exceptions to that.
Yeah.
That's all I think.
Right.
I think, actually, I think that the hearing examiner done a pretty good job with things, other than those few exceptions that we're talking about. I think it's pretty much on par with where the board's at.
So I guess on the issue of statute of limitations, I'll bring that up now, if we're all in agreement at this point, that we think we should adopt the order with these modifications. I personally, I agree with the hearings orders, with the hearing examiner's order that the statute of limitations does not bar TRS's claims against Mr. Zebrocki. So I would recommend that we adopt that point as well with the others. But I think that particular point needs to have a couple of modifications. One, I think we need to make sure that we're adopting it with respect to this case only, primarily because the law that was applied here is a 2007 law. There's a new 2015 law that would apply to any future cases. And then secondly, I'd like to make a revision to the discovery doctrine used. As the board said in the Walsh case, it should be based on, the statute of limitations should start running based on actual discovery, not based on the due diligence doctrine that was used by the hearings examiner in this case.
Is there agreement on?
Yeah, Dan's right on track.
Jeff, do you feel the same?
I do, yes.
I do as well. So, we need more discussion, or are you ready to have a motion and vote on this issue? What do you guys, I mean, we've had a lot of time with this material, we've had a lot of opportunity to see these things. If anyone is ready to move, or we can continue to discuss.
Just to reiterate what we've said, I think we need to make sure that anything that was either misstated or omitted, we need to make sure that that's corrected within that order, which I believe we've talked about. But again, there were several things that by numbers were misstated.
Paragraph numbers.
Yeah, paragraph numbers and statute of limitations, for sure, I agree. That it applies back when this case started. And certainly that law has changed, without doubt. And moving forward, we wouldn't want to suggest that that's going to affect any future cases. We have to follow the laws that are in effect during those times.
Not intended to be precedent setting.
Right.
One other thing to consider is, I think in a prior order, the hearings examiner discussed some of the alleged constitutional issues. That wording, I don't think, was in this final order. I'd like to incorporate that wording and bring it forward to this final order. Okay.
Yeah, clearly it's not our place or is to talk about Constitution.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up as well. I think it needs to be referenced.
All right, so we need a motion?
Yes.
I wonder,
Yeah.
my understanding is that I will draft, at the board's direction, a final decision, a written decision consistent with what you have discussed verbally
Yes.
today. So I wonder if I could summarize kind of my understanding to make sure that I've got it right.
Please do.
Okay.
Please do.
So my understanding is that the board will adopt the hearing examiner's recommended order, which was the subparts, I think, on, I believe it was page 27 and 28 of his order, with a few modifications based on a review of the complete record. And so my understanding of the modifications would be that there were several findings of fact that referred to the incorrect paragraph number in the stipulated facts. My understanding, it was only, there was no question about the content of those findings of fact. It was just that it was a citation to the wrong paragraph number, so I should correct those. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
And then the one other issue that I should correct was that there were, or modify, is that there were several conclusions of law that refer to 2011 TRS law instead of 2007. We should make it clear that it's 2011 law, 2007 law that applies, but that the end result is the same based on the 2007 law that was in place and the evidence and testimony and other evidence that was presented at the hearing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
There also was a typographical error. I think somebody mentioned, I think it was in conclusion of law 22, where the hearing examiner referred to 2017 instead of 2007. I should correct that.
Yes.
Okay. I should incorporate the hearing examiner's previous order on the constitutional issues, and I think that was an order on motion and limine. Correct? Okay. And then I should modify the hearing examiner's conclusions of law that deal with the statute of limitations. My understanding is that the board is adopting the hearing examiner's ultimate conclusion, which is that the statute of limitations does not bar TRS's claims with the following modifications. One would be that I should emphasize that the board is only adopting the hearing examiner's conclusion and his analysis with respect to this case only. Two is that I should make clear that there was a statute, I think it's 1920-1215, that was adopted in 2015 that would apply in other cases. Three, I believe, if I remember what Dan said correctly, was that with respect to the hearing examiner used the discovery doctrine as part of his analysis, and he applied sort of an objective due diligence standard instead of the actual discovery, which in Walsh, based on 2007 law, the board said in Walsh that we should apply an actual discovery standard. And I guess sort of the end conclusion, though, is that no matter whether the due diligence or the actual discovery standard is used, the same result applies here or would occur here. Is that everything? Did I miss anything there? Okay, all right, thank you.
So I would make a motion that we adopt the order with the modifications that we've just discussed and that were just outlined by the director.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on this process? Motion. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye as well. So, Mike, we need you to draft.
Yeah, so I will draft a written final decision. My thought is maybe the way to do it is that we have a 90-day period by which we need to have all this done.
That started back in,
Yeah,
okay.
by my calculation, 90 days was August 16th, so I'd like to get done sooner than later. I think I can draft this final decision very quickly. So my suggestion would be that I draft the final decision, I send it to the board members, and I send it to both parties. And then we would need, I believe, to have a subsequent meeting that needs to occur soon. We need to do it soon, but still provide enough notice to everyone. Where we would, it probably would be, I understand it might need to be telephonic.
Probably.
And then we would, or you, excuse me, would vote on the final decision that I drafted. I don't know if we can set a date now, or if we just want to do it soon, but if possible, would it be possible to do like maybe the next Friday? I don't know, 10th? Because what I could do then, I think, is I could have a proposed decision, a written decision that I will attempt to make consistent with what you've said today by Monday or Tuesday to everyone.
Okay.
And then we could, if it would work for everyone, we could have a telephonic meeting on Friday to vote.
That would work for me.
Can we-
Any later than that wouldn't be good.
What about Wednesday? Is that too soon?
The only question would be that we need to do it, well, yeah, I mean, if we
need to notice.
I think we could do it Wednesday.
Friday I could do, I'll be traveling in that meeting, so I don't know exactly.
I know I'd have to do it cell phone too
Yeah.
on Friday if we would, but.
I'm gonna do it so far too. That's okay.
I think especially if we announce it here, I think Wednesday would be okay. So whatever works for
All
the
right.
two of you between those.
Afternoon on
Afternoon,
Wednesday?
Yeah, Wednesday, anytime after probably 2:30 I'm good.
Should we say 3 o'clock?
3 o'clock on
3 o'clock
Wednesday?
on Wednesday?
That's great.
Okay, so then I will draft a final decision to send to all the board members and then to the parties. And especially now that we're doing it Wednesday, I'll attempt to get that to everyone by Monday at the latest, like Tuesday early.
Okay.
Okay?
Sorry to ruin your weekend.
No.
Thank you for all the help with this.
No problem.
We appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else that I need to be
Anything
directed
else?
to do? Okay, thank you.
Go enjoy your Friday.
All right.
All right.
Actually, yeah, that'd be great, especially, do you think you would be able to get that to me?
Soon, it should be,
Yeah.
this weekend.
Oh, that'd be great, yeah, that'd
Okay.
be fine. even
That's
Monday.
expedite, so it will
I know.
cost more.
That's right.
Okay.
Even Monday would be fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
yep, that'll be no problem.
Okay,
For sure. Yep.
great.
Do you want a
That'd be
copy?
very helpful.
Yes, please.
Okay.
And I'm guessing Mr. does as well, like.
Well,
staff before you walk.
Well, he didn't tell me, but we'll call him.
Yeah, I'd say,
Well, two working days.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I guess you could confirm if you want to. but
Well, I have to because we'll bill him for a copy, so I.
Oh, yeah, so
Send him
maybe
one
do
that
ask
he-
him then, yeah.
To make
I
him
don't-
pay for one that he doesn't want, so.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yep,
Okay.
we'll let him know, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mhm.
Do you need my email?
I think I have it from last time.
Okay, great.
So thanks.
Thanks a lot.
It's been going on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks.
I think we have extra packets. Would you like a board packet?
I'm just here observing
Okay.
for the very first time, so thank
Okay.
you. Yeah,
Okay.
just fine. I appreciate that very much.
Oh, okay.
Sort of
Would you like to?
Deputy Superintendent Joe Walker.
Okay, all right.
Yes, good morning, everyone.
Thank you, we appreciate it. I can't see your name tag, Maya.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Jewel, yeah, Deputy Superintendent for Operations, Jewel Walker is my name. And so I've recently come from the field, and this is 2 months now. 2 months into the job, so it's all that. But I've known Scott for a long time, so that connection there. I was thinking that.
We haven't had an OPI representative here for a long time.
Well, you know, I'm just here observing and checking things out so that I can make connections with everyone,
Sure.
get familiar. Thank you all.
No problem. And we're on to the draft legislation, which is just a discussion item, but looks like you guys are well on your way.
We are, Madam Chair, so I'm going to turn this over to Denise in just a minute, but I wanted to emphasize, these are really draft legislation at this point. We haven't even met with each functional group, which we will do, to make sure we have everything dialed in, and not proposing something that we can't actually administer. For the most part, everything in here, there's nothing in the housekeeping bill that would change the rights of our members. It's just a really clarification. And I think Denise has done a good job of doing that. I wrote up in your packet on page 15, kind of a really high level, 30,000 foot sort of level of what we're attempting to do in the housekeeping bill in the two main sections, one of which is dormant member status and withdrawals, and then the other is beneficiary designations and payments to beneficiaries. So with that, I'll have Denise walk you through. I mean, we're going to be running quite a bit ahead of schedule so I think we should may as well take the time to actually go through each paragraph, and if you have questions, we can discuss them as they come up. Yeah? You like legislation, right?
Especially when Denise talks about it.
Well, no, that's,
You can say that safely now that the stenographer's coming.
Right, I can always deny it later, right?
Camera's still.
Dang it.
Okay, so start with inactive and dormant membership withdrawal. You're all aware in the past of sort of our dormant member status. Dormant accounts essentially was how it was referred to before. If we go 7 years without activity on a member's account, they go into a dormant status. That doesn't modify their rights to their money on account with the retirement system. It simply means that essentially we reactivate them when they come back to us and make claim to the funds. We also have a process internally where we periodically look for those people to try to get their money back to them. That's become sort of a heightened concern for the retirement system because of the required minimum distribution requirements in IRS law. We now have to have, and I shouldn't say now, it's just something that a lot of public plans are dealing with at this point, is how do you go about finding those people? And what we wanted to do, because the dormant member status essentially has been in our statutes for a long time, was to clarify what that means to people, and have that be a place where for term non-vested people, we essentially, if they haven't withdrawn from the retirement system or come back to work in an active member status, and we've done our due diligence to try to find them and get their money into their hands, they go into a dormant member status. It's laid out in statute what that means, and essentially we have no further contact with them until they come back to us. I mean, at some point it has to be on them to come and claim their funds rather than us continuing to go around and around in circles trying to find them and then be up against the wall when they're turning 70 and a half and we haven't heard from them for 20 years. So in order to make that dormant status be something more specific and more sort of final, we wanted to lay that out very clearly in statute so people are aware of it. They will receive notice. Our internal process will be they will receive notice when they go term non-vested with us, which is after 180 days from their last report to the retirement system. They will receive a letter from us with an application for withdrawal. They will receive that notice again every year for 6 years. The 7th year that we would notify them of that, we will do a fairly substantial lost person search for them and try to put certified notice with a withdrawal application in their hands before we actually move them to dormant member status. So it will be a more sort of rigorous and routine process internally for us to find people when they're no longer, you know, realistically participants in the retirement system. And again, that will apply only to dormant or to terminated non-vested people. Terminated vested people, because we have always advised them, and it's still legally accurate, that they have the right to leave their money on account with the retirement system until they are eligible for unreduced retirement benefits. So we will not dormant status terminated vested members until they have reach normal retirement age 60, then we will go essentially through a very similar process of notifying them with an application for retirement benefits, putting certified notice in their hands, doing the lost person search, putting the certified notice in their hands and attempting to get them started on their retirement benefit before their RMD requirement.
Is this a large number?
Yeah, I was just
So
wondering.
what's the scale?
So on term vested, it's fairly small.
I was gonna
mean,
say.
we rarely get up against the age 70 and a half and they're not active and not receiving a benefit.
Right.
Now, with that said, we do have some, and some with substantial years of service, and they're actually substantial retirement benefits that they should be receiving. And, you know, who knows why people make the decisions they do, but we do have it happen.
So if they hit that, sorry to interrupt, Sean, but if they hit that 70 and a half, are you required to pay the RMDs to the government?
So if they hit
No.
70 and a half, our statute says that we would retire them under a 10-year term certain benefit. And what happens is if they're beyond their required beginning date, a portion of their benefits would be subject to a 50% federal excise tax. So yes, but we don't withhold that. That's on them.
Right.
We sort of have to help them figure out what that amount is, and then they report it on their tax return.
Yeah, so no, at this point, there is no requirement that we pay those benefits if we can't find the person to the government. Any unclaimed benefits, after the person dies for 5 years, a beneficiary or that can make a claim to a refund of member contributions or survivor benefits that might have been payable. Any benefits not claimed within that time frame are forfeited to the retirement system, go back into the pension trust fund. And at this point, there is no requirement that we pay those to the government, pay them in taxes to the person. So, for those few people who are vested and don't do what they're supposed to do, and we can't find them, it's problematic, yeah.
So on the other side of that coin, I'm sure this is a very small number, but is there any qualifying period of time that they are required to work before they're even eligible to become a dormant member? So,
I think you're talking about term non-vested. So
Yeah.
if they've been reported to the system and we have contributions on account for them.
Then they're in it.
And then they terminate and they're missing for any over 180 days, then they would be flipped to term non-vested status. TRS has general requirements for membership, of which, a person needs to be reported or work for at least 30 days in a TRS reportable capacity to be a member of the system.
That could be a lot of substitutes too, we just don't know.
It could be.
Yeah.
Coaches,
Pardon?
people that are coaching that are not teachers.
So some of them, remember last session, we put in how we determine service credit and the number of days or hours worked for those kinds of stipends. We would use that to determine are they eligible for membership or not.
Typically, the chances that somebody who is only doing extra duty, what I think of as extra duty services like coaching or that, would not generally meet the 210 hours in a fiscal year to be eligible to participate, but they could. So our membership statute specifically, a member is somebody who has a member contribution account with us.
So what are the numbers in that non-vested dormant category?
I was just looking at all that, just through the extra mix. There's quite a few term non-vested members that, not that haven't been flipped to dormant. We haven't been actually moving people to dormant since I've been here at TRS. That has been done at one time prior to my arrival where they sort of, they went through all the data and they selected certain, based on whatever criteria they used, but we hadn't heard from them for an extended period. They switched them over to dormant. Now, just because they're dormant doesn't mean they can't come back and reclaim that money. That's all laid out in statute. They can. We reinstitute their account balance. We give them credit for the interest the money would have earned had it just remained in their account balance the whole time. So they're essentially held harmless. It's just they need to let us know. Usually the problem is we can't find them.
I've had more than one client where we're discussing their work history and, oh yeah, and I worked for the state for 10 years, way back when, 70s or 80s or whatever. Well, have you applied for your benefits? And like, no, I don't think I have any. And we call, and they get a huge back pay, and they start getting monthly income.
Yeah.
That's happened more than one occasion.
So,
Forget it.
and
stuff,
They do, yeah.
important stuff.
And for some of our members, that's a huge, because statutorily, we pay benefits retroactive to the first date of full retirement eligibility. So if somebody doesn't begin receiving their benefits until they're 73 years old, and we're paying them retroactive to age 60, 50% of that is going to be paid to the federal government, right? So, you know, we are really trying to tighten our processes up internally and get people their money when they're supposed to have it, so we don't have those kinds of things. There is a provision in the statute that's lined through now, I'm sorry, I'm not finding it right now, but with respect to dormant accounts, it says that the account going to dormancy doesn't prejudice the rights of the person in the retirement system. That's lined through, but, you know, be advised that all of the provisions now on dormant account and what their rights are after their account goes to dormant essentially does the same thing. Nobody loses anything by going to dormant other than, you know, continuing efforts at contact by the retirement system. But frankly, there shouldn't be very many people that we don't find with our sort of enhanced process of looking for people, so.
Yeah, and that's actually on page 21, 1920, 503, where it used to be, in current law, it's transfer of dormant or unclaimed accounts. We've replaced that dormant piece earlier in the statute, or later, somewhere we replaced it, but the language is right there, and it's struck where by going to dormant, their account's not jeopardized at all in any way, and then we replace that language further on in the
Yeah, it's all,
because we're making 503 specific to forfeiture of unclaimed accounts, and then
That makes sense.
dormant member status is covered.
is 303.3,
Yeah, 303 on
page 19 of the packet.
So I'm going to interrupt just for a second. So under the current statutes, inactive membership is a little bit not really how we apply it. So they really, if you read the current statutes, an inactive member would have to be someone that was just terminated non-vested, when in fact, you can be an inactive member as a terminated vested member as well. So we've done what we needed to just make it clear that you can be terminated vested or terminated non-vested, and either way, you're going to be considered an inactive member of the system.
Yeah, and to clarify the distinction between the various membership statuses, from active to inactive to dormant, and how, you know, each one of those changes. In this particular chunk of legislation, other questions on dormant status, membership status? The other thing we've dealt with here are withdrawals from the retirement system. I will tell you that the big change on withdrawals right now is that currently we allow somebody under federal law, when somebody withdraws because they have direct rollover rights of their member contributions from TRS to another qualified plan, under federal law, we have to give them notice of their rollover rights and a 30-day waiting period, essentially, to change their mind about whether to take that as a lump sum distribution or directly roll it over into another qualifying plan or that. We can allow people to waive that 30-day waiting period, and we have done that. Our current withdrawal applications allow somebody to waive the 30-day waiting period, and then we process withdrawals on a weekly basis. So somebody can go from saying, I've terminated employment yesterday to I'm withdrawing from the retirement system, and within a couple of weeks they're receiving a refund of their member contributions. Not that, you know, it's necessarily, we have a number of people who sort of view us as a savings account that can be withdrawn. That's less common now, I think, than it used to be, my perception. But in any case, it's very uncommon for plans to allow people to waive that 30-day waiting period anymore for considerations of both fraud abuse, fraud detection, fraud prevention, and to make sure that somebody is has the full ability to exercise their rollover rights under federal law. Very few plans allow waiver of that 30-day waiting period anymore. So internally, our determination was we should not be allowing people to waive that 30-day waiting period either. It will also prevent some of those circumstances where people are using us as a savings account and, you know, every couple of years cashing out over their summer break and then going back to work.
So on that, I mean, and I outlined that on page 15 there, number 2. You know, this 90-day waiting period is a big change. So in current practice, where we get the application, they waive the 30-day waiting period. They can get their funds typically within, you know, 7 to 14 days, so fairly quick turnaround. And I can tell you, for some people, you know, it's like they need that money yesterday, and they call every single day. So going to a 90-day mandatory waiting period, the first year especially, is going to be, it's going to be hard. No, not hard, it's not the right word. It's going to be challenging. I think once expectations change and down the road, it will be like everything else, is well, you can't get your money for 90 days, so don't, there's no sense calling every other day about it, you know. Just so you're aware, I mean, you may hear some, you know, out in the field, you could hear about this if we do move forward with a 90-day waiting period. It is really best practice if you look at all the other systems around the country. A lot of them use a 90-day waiting period for fraud prevention type of reasons. And part of why we're looking at modifying the statute is with an eye toward going to online withdrawals, and we need to have, what that means is when we get the online withdrawal, we're gonna sit on it for 90 days, make sure we have all the wages recorded for that person, all the contributions are received by TRS, so that when we do issue the actual payment, everything's accounted for. Currently, where you have the sort of fast turnaround, where it's 10 days to 14 days, on occasion, they'll tell us, yep, all the wages are in, we'll contact the employer, they'll let us know, because they certify on the withdrawal that all the wages are in. And then, lo and behold, we get another little bit of wages come in after we've already processed the withdrawal, and then we end up processing another little tiny withdrawal. So it's really to sort of prevent some of those issues and to set us up for online transactions in this area, but we will hear about it.
It will also, I would think, reduce the number of people that actually request the distribution in full rather than waiting to take an annuitization or something later, would you assume?
It could for those that Denise was referring to that sort of use it as an every year, I'm going to cash it out, use it as my summer fund money, because the 90 days won't have passed, and if they have wages reported, it's going to reset their 90-day clock.
So that
People are doing that.
Again,
It
it's,
happens.
yeah, it's my impression that it's less common now than it was when I first got here, but it is, you know, it's
These
not
are people with
uncommon.
ongoing employment with the same employer?
No.
So they
typically
certify
not.
that they're not, and so they don't have a contract necessarily for the next year.
Right, so they're moving
However,
from school to school?
Correct.
or they could be, if it's in a type of position where you don't have a contract ahead of time,
Pairs.
it could be, yeah, para or, you know, stuff.
probably goes up in bad economic times. But here's a question I have about that. Has there been much evaluation done in terms of the health of the system itself, in terms of what is better? It would seem to me that you could make the case that it is probably better for the health of the retirement system for people to walk away with their cash, because the annuitization structure is pretty. When I was looking at PRS systems, for example, their annuitization structure is substantially better than private annuitization structure. So much so that it's pretty bad advice for someone like Danny or I to tell somebody to take their cash and walk and do an IRA rollover from the PERS system. I assume that's also the case here. So wouldn't it be cheaper? Not that I'm making a case for this, but just to understand the reality.
So we just cash everybody out every year
Yeah.
and we're good.
And we wouldn't need the system.
So, you're right. I mean, to the extent that a member withdraws their funds and doesn't actually receive monthly retirement benefits,
Right.
it is a gain for the system, because we continue to keep those employer contributions. Employer contributions are never attributed to a person. Once they're received, they belong to the system. So yeah, I mean, there is some of that, but that's not, we're not I mean, we should be looking out for what's best for our members.
I understand.
And what's best for our members is to leave their funds on account with TRS, continue to work, and eventually qualify for a benefit. But if they don't, because they never vested, then we want them to withdraw their funds. They need to withdraw their funds.
So the reason for the 90 days is to make sure that there's not fraud
Yeah.
on the one hand, and also that it's sort of a deterrent to them doing it on an annual basis, but that wasn't the intention.
Well, and it also will allow us to get actual certification from a receiving plan. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll roll it over, maybe one of the types of funds that you manage where they're rolling it over, or they may be rolling it over to another qualified plan, and we need to have them certify that the plan's eligible to receive tax deferred contributions, et cetera. So it builds in a time frame for us to allow for that.
How much pushback do you expect from members?
Oh, there'll definitely be some pushback.
If-
But if it's clear, I mean, and we have a delayed effective
Right.
date on this section, it would go into effect till January 1 of 2020. So we would let people know in the newsletter, I think if you manage expectations, once they're really.
Well, most members who have never done it wouldn't know the difference anyway.
No.
Right.
No, they won't.
You don't know until you're, it's not like you're looking ahead going, I
Right.
haven't, I'm building.
Yeah.
You don't have a clue.
The people that are gonna be really upset are the ones that are desperate for cash.
Yeah.
So-
But with that said, I mean, we're a retirement system, we're not a savings account. So, I mean, 90 days is reasonable. It's reasonable. I think. Yep.
It's becoming the norm with more retirement systems.
Northwest Energy is attempting to do exactly the same thing.
Yeah, and I will say that the people using us as a savings account is probably at the bottom of the list of the issues we're addressing by adding the waiting time. And one of the biggest ones, of course, is what Sean just said, the certification from a receiving plan that they are eligible to receive tax-deferred contributions from us. Right now, we are relying upon the member's certification that the account they've designated, and under IRS law, we can still do that, but it's, again, becoming sort of standard procedure for retirement systems to require certification directly from the receiving plan, so. We'll have 6 months for Darla to do fabulous
And
member
one
education.
other point on the withdrawal section is we did add in the new section, we made it clear, and this is no change to current law, but we made it clear that if a tier one withdraws their funds and they come back, even if they withdraw, they come back as a tier two.
Right.
And that's already in statute, it's in 1921-01, sub 28, which is our definition section of the code, so we're not changing anything. But it's in a place that people wouldn't consider.
Good that
Yeah.
people aware of it.
Yes.
I saw that.
That and the fact that they are forfeiting their creditable service with the retirement system, and that it's surprising how many people have withdrawn from the system, and then years later, they think they still have that credit, I took my money out, but I still have the creditable service. Well,
Well, that's interesting too.
Not unless they repay
it's-
it.
Not unless they buy it back.
Not unless they.
I'm assuming anybody that's, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming anybody that's keeping their money in the system has somewhere in the back of their mind, I might teach them and add to that.
Right.
Yes, right.
So until they get that out of their system, none of this is going to
Right.
Yep, for the non-vested people, that's absolutely true.
apply. But,
No, you're right.
you understand.
Okay, this is kind of irrelevant to the discussion, but do you know what percentage of the funds collect, how to put this? How many people don't make it to vesting as a percentage of teachers? They work for a couple of years, they contribute to the system, and then it just stays in the system, and they never collect.
I don't know.
It's probably not a very high percentage,
It's
is
a statistic that they
Yeah.
use in
It's
their
actually-
evaluation.
It's actually a fairly high number of first-year teachers that don't work beyond the first year. I mean, that's a pretty high
we
percentage,
saw a
like
table of that
30-40%.
from-
1 in
Seven on the
5
list.
is
Last time.
and I don't know about what they do with their money, but 1 in 5 teachers doesn't make it to 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I think if you look at just the first year, and this would include teachers, paras, then it would be our home, because we don't gather actual job title data. It's higher than that even. It's 30, 40% don't come back for that second year.
Okay. Interesting.
Schools have to put a lot of energy into
Yeah.
it.
It's expensive. Okay.
Is that it? Thanks,
That's only the
thanks.
first half.
Oh. I was like, thanks, Denise, that was great. You're right, I'm sorry, there's a lot more. It was done.
This actually may be the easier part of it though, because we've changed the provisions on our beneficiary designations and how payments are made to beneficiaries. Because first of all, the provisions were located in numerous places in our statutes. There was no provision that expressly said somebody has to designate a beneficiary. And while it's not necessarily legally true that somebody has to designate a beneficiary, our legal expectation is that they will designate a beneficiary. We have provisions that say what happens if somebody doesn't designate a beneficiary. And then we have provisions that describe what happened with account balances if the member and all of the beneficiaries were deceased before benefits equaled the account balance or that sort of thing. Those provisions were drafted anticipating that there was only one person who was a beneficiary who had been receiving benefits at those points. And based on what benefit option a member elects, those provisions were not necessarily accurate across the board. So we've tried to clean up the provisions both with respect to who can and has to designate a beneficiary, who should and can designate a beneficiary, and how benefits will be paid upon the death of a member to beneficiaries, etc. I don't think that there's anything. We did change one thing. We have our provision currently 1927-17, which is we sort of refer to it as the next of kin provision. Next of kin is a term that's specific to probate law. It is not, we are not subject to the probate law. By and large, that's also one of the issues we were addressing with these beneficiary designation provisions. There are beneficiary designation provisions in Title 72 that arguably apply to us if we don't have specific beneficiary provisions that supersede those. So we wanted to make sure that the way we currently, apply our law with respect to beneficiaries continues to be the prevailing law, and that somebody doesn't have an argument that Title 72 applies in its stead. We've made it more specific, more clear, and put it in statute at this point. So we no longer use the term next of kin. There are a couple of places where that's not true. You will see next of kin in here, but it's appropriate in those few places. But for our purposes, we now have designated beneficiaries, a beneficiary actually named by our member, or somebody else who's legally entitled to designated beneficiary. Some alternate payees are entitled to designated beneficiary. And alternate beneficiaries. So now what used to be referred to as the next of kin statute, 717, are called alternate beneficiaries. It has always been our statute, that the order of priority for our alternate beneficiaries are first the estate, and then the family members, or the next of kin, spouses, children, parents, and then going down to grandchildren. I'd have to look at we go all the way down to nieces and nephews. But and so one of the things that's in here for consideration by the board is whether or not that order of priority, if there is not a designated beneficiary on file and we are looking for somebody to make the payment to, whether we should default first to the spouse, the children, the parents, the next of kins essentially, rather than to the estate. And of course, the big difference is, and there could be an actuarial impact, although I think our looking tells us that it would be very small if any, is that if we find a person, under our statutes, a surviving spouse, a surviving child, has the right to elect, if the member was vested at the time of death, a monthly lifetime benefit as opposed to a refund of member contributions. If we're paying to an estate, all we're going to pay is a refund of member contributions.
For that to happen, this other family member was not designated as their beneficiary. So Denise and I have disagreed a little bit on this point. I think we have it right in statute currently, and that if the estate is not going to be probated, then you go down the list. If it's probated, it should be, I think, paid to the estate. So go ahead, continue.
No, that's fine,
I
and
mean, I
that's
just
what the
wanted
statute
just-
currently says, so I,
My initial response is to agree with Sean, but what is your rationale for wanting to make that change, Denise?
just the reality that people don't always keep their beneficiary designations up to date. I mean, we've had some contested case matters with circumstances where people have been divorced, spouses passed away, they've been remarried, they've had another child since they made their last beneficiary designation, and you know, I know we can't necessarily fix everybody's inattention, but
So let me ask you this, if there's a situation where there would be a family that would contest the order, could that put you in a position, no?
of what, making an exception, or?
Well, okay, let's start with a different question. Let's say the only remaining beneficiaries are 8 nieces and nephews. Now you've got to divide that payment up 8 ways.
And we do that.
And your administrative cost is higher. But what if somebody in the family contests that, let's say there was a verbal discussion with the deceased that one person in the family should have gotten a larger percentage. Does that put you in a legal liability?
And that's exactly why we have our statutory provisions and why we've made them more explicit in this legislation, is because we pay according to the beneficiary designation on file. We have statutory requirements for how those designations are made and how we don't do percentage shares amongst beneficiaries of the same class. So if we have 3 primary beneficiaries, they take in equal shares. There are no assignments, and it makes no difference what anybody has discussed in their home with their family members. That's statutorily how the distribution is made. So
This would only apply if someone dies intestate and there is no probate, or it's whether there's probate or not?
So it's on page 34 in your packet. You can see the current 1927-17. I mean, some of it's lined out and some of the new stuff is there. So if there is no designated beneficiary and the estate is not probated, then we go through this list of this hierarchy list, and you can see the old has the strike through where you have husband or wife at the top. We're just striking that to saying legal spouse, and so we're not really changing the order there at all.
keep in mind, Dan, that all of this falls outside of the probate code. Now, we can only pay to an estate that is probated because we have to have a valid tax identification number for the individual or the entity that we make payment to for tax reporting purposes. So we don't pay to estates, we don't pay out to personal representatives currently under wills for an estate that is not probated. So at the point that we pay it out to the estate, then it's the funds become subject to probate. But that falls outside of the TRS right. Does that make sense? So these provisions would apply whether the estate is whether the person has a will and their estate will be probated or not. If they have a designated beneficiary, we pay to the designated beneficiary And it makes no, yeah, and that falls outside of the probate code. They're non-probate assets.
So you have some of this highlighted language speaks to the personal representative, and the payment's 5,000 or less.
Right. We have circumstances fairly frequently, frankly, where we cannot, there's no designated beneficiary, we can't find a next of kin. The person did have a will with a personal representative designated in it, or a beneficiary designated in the will, but the amount of money is so small that the estate is not going to be probated. There are provisions in Title 72, and once again, we don't necessarily want to subject ourselves to Title 72. But in Title 72, there are provisions for gathering the assets owed to a small estate not subject to probate. And that's if the total value of the estate is less than $50,000. There is a subsection of that provision specific to Department of Revenue that says Department of Revenue doesn't have to worry about the size of the estate. All they have to look at is the size of the amount that they have to distribute. And if it's $5,000 or less, they can make that distribution to the personal representative under a will without consideration for that, without that estate having to be probated. So the
That's interesting, because
turquoise,
if the estate is never probated, there's never a personal representative named.
they're not legally,
Nothing.
but there is a personal representative or an executor under a, named in a will.
Yeah.
So they're not a court-appointed personal representative, but they're named in a will. And so the Title 72 provision allows them to lay claim to assets owed to that individual. And so this is in there as something for the board to consider as a potential addition to our statutes to allow us to pay those funds out without, well, yeah, we're looking for, again, I'm gonna keep using the term even though I said it's not relevant to us. We've looked for a next of kin already. I mean, we've looked for any eligible beneficiary under our list of spouse, children, parents, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, whatever the case may be, and haven't found any of them. But, we frequently are advised by a funeral home that a personal representative has taken responsibility, personal representative under a will, not a court-appointed one. And they may very well have claims to pay on behalf, final expenses and that sort of thing on behalf of the deceased member. And, it's maybe very reasonable for us to go ahead and put that money in their hands when we've determined that there is nobody else with a greater right to the funds. Our statutes don't currently make that allowance. It doesn't happen that often. It doesn't happen often that we can't find somebody, but a couple of times a year, I would say.
And if it goes to the estate, and it always goes as a lump sum, that if you
Yes.
find beneficiaries that weren't named, then they would get the payments.
Potentially,
It depends.
if it's an active member, yes. If it's a retired member, it's almost always going to just be the remainder of the account balance.
Right. That will always be the case, payable to a beneficiary.
Interesting. I bet a niece or a nephew will be pleasantly surprised. I'm like, what? You're getting down that far down the list.
Empty who?
It's like,
Yeah.
Sean, what would your argument be to keep it as is?
So the way it is now, and that's, you can see it there on in the statute, if it's not if the estate's not probated, then we'll go with the hierarchy. I guess my argument is if it's probated, why wouldn't we just go with one check to the estate and let them split up whatever those funds are?
Seems simpler to me.
But I don't understand the difference here, because we were talking about estates that are not probated. What's the difference between the two?
So if it's probated,
If it's probated, we cut a check.
under current law, we would cut a check to the estate.
Under the proposed change, what would
So under this is drafted to be the same thing as current law, it's just reworded and clarified.
We're kind of mixing two different
Yeah,
issues
sorry.
here. So first
Yeah.
issue is, in the list of, if there is no designated beneficiary, who we are going to pay out first. And right now, our statute says the estate. And Sean's argument is that it should stay the estate.
Okay.
I'm not arguing either way. I'm simply saying, you know, a lot of other plans allow benefits to be paid, survivor benefits of a deceased active member to be paid first to a spouse, and they don't, nobody else goes all the way down to nieces and nephews that I could find. But to a spouse, surviving children, or parents, in a lot of cases, that they would still have the right to elect the monthly benefit as opposed to the estate
But
receiving
that would be
a
their
refunded
choice at that
contribution.
point. That would be the beneficiary's election.
It is currently, yes. The statute says we pay a lump sum refund of member contributions, but in lieu of that, if the member was vested at the time of death, the designated beneficiary can elect a monthly lifetime benefit. So that's definitely a change in how things are currently done.
I'm still worried about this. I don't, maybe I've got a confusion here, but let's assume there's two children, one can be found and one cannot, but is not proved to be deceased. So all of the payment goes to the child that you find. No, why wouldn't that happen?
One just keeping his half
It
share,
would be
because it
equal
says
shares.
equal shares. You just want to pay to the other person.
Well,
So let's assume there was a confusion about whether or not that person was dead. They've been missing for 5 years. You know, it just makes me wonder if you're gonna find yourself in. Okay, but then half of the money remains and nobody's collecting. So,
in reality, in practice, I don't believe that that's the case. I'm not sure that we've ever had a circumstance where somebody has said the other person may be alive, may not be alive, but,
that's just the best example I could come up
yeah,
with.
right.
Well, yeah, I mean, stranger things have happened.
I mean, ultimately, we would pay out to the one survivor that we could find. We would not hang on to money that would arguably belong to somebody because it might belong to somebody else that we can't find. Now, what our process would be from point A to point Z, I can't tell you, but we have, you know, a limitation on the number of years. Well, go ahead and tell me if I'm wrong.
If we know there is another child and they're supposed to share in equal shares based upon our statute, I think we would only give the half for one child until we have confirmation on it. I think we haven't had to cross that bridge.
And just paying it to the estate solves that entire issue.
A lump sum.
Yes, if the estate, again, keep in mind that that only applies if the estate is probated, and I said before that it probably wouldn't be a huge actuarial change, and the reason is because in most cases, of course, you can't contact an estate. You have to find the people who would probably be heirs under the estate, which is that list of survivor family members, so to speak, and we send letters to them saying essentially, you know, we find somebody, we get information from them about who the survivors are. We send letters out to the people at an equal level, so if it's just children and there's 4 of them, we send out 4 letters saying, you know, you're entitled to a portion of this refund unless the estate is going to be probated. And in most cases, the estate is not going to be probated. I mean, most of our payouts are to the survivors anyway. But, I mean, it's not unworkable the way it is.
And this occurs most often when a beneficiary was listed but that person predeceased, or when a beneficiary was never listed.
Either way.
Either way.
Usually
Do we require people to list a beneficiary?
They are required early in their career, yes. But we don't, if they don't ever send in a beneficiary designation form, we don't terminate their membership.
How about, well, wouldn't it be possible to set that up as a required precedent to start getting benefits? I mean,
Well, at the time
right
of
from right up-
retirement, they.
but I mean, right up front, right, when they
Yeah.
become eligible to start receiving retirement benefits through their pay, to require the beneficiary designation at that point and keep it on file.
Right, but 20
We do.
years down the road after you,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
When I started teaching, I had one beneficiary.
A lot of times it's.
25
you
years
set it
later,
up
I
and
had
you
a
didn't-
different one.
Right, but if you changed it, because you're
I haven't
cognizant.
changed mine, and my husband's deceased, but my contingent beneficiaries are still there. you know,
Are
my
still there.
children. But yeah, it's, you think about it, I think about it, and then I forget it.
So,
Right.
what,
Do it on your
Should
own.
do it.
Yes,
Fine.
exactly.
We'll hand you a form.
And
Uh-huh.
there are some people I'm sure you want to forget.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering.
And don't want collecting your
I'm
benefits.
just wondering, we're having all this discussion surrounding what should be done after the fact. Why not just require that the teachers have a beneficiary on file?
It really is a requirement.
It is, but you're still gonna run into this situation.
And frequently, they designate their estate as their beneficiary.
Okay.
Young teachers in particular,
Sure.
people who don't have spouses, don't have children.
Sure.
So we're in the same boat with, people who designated their estate as their only beneficiary, and then we can only pay to the estate if it's being probated. Otherwise, we're in the same position of looking for, we'd be in that position with those people anyway, because for our purposes, there would be a designated beneficiary on
Right.
file.
If the lump sum that would be payable is anywhere near 50,000, you're gonna force those estates into probate anyway, so
Right.
it probably isn't all that often.
Well, we're going to force them into probate, or we're going to pay to the next of kin's, so yes, you're right. I mean, and is this, so, I told you before, we were mixing sort of two issues. That, the first issue is that, order of priority, estate first, or next of kin's first. Right now, our statute is estate first. Sean's preference is that it stays that way. I don't have a preference one way or the other. I'm simply saying it's, typically, we're paying out to the next of kin anyway. But anyway, and then after that, so assume it stays the way it is, estate first, then next of kin. If we don't find we don't have a probated estate and we don't have a next of kin, we have an estate, or we have a payment of less than $5,000, and we have a personal representative named in a will, should we add them to the list then of potential recipients? Otherwise, in most cases, those will be unclaimed benefits, and they will forfeit to the retirement system at some point.
Danny, you just brought up a really good point. If it's being paid, now Denise, this may be in line with your argument, because if we try to find them a beneficiary and we're starting to pay that out, that's a will substitute. That's not going to generate a probate if it's paid out to the estate of blood, which could theoretically cause the members an issue. So that would be a line of reasoning that would support the premise.
Absolutely, because when you pay out to an estate, it becomes, while it's not a probate asset as far as TRS is concerned, it becomes a probate asset subject to creditors' claims, all of that kind of stuff. Which I think is why a lot of other systems first look for the primary survivors, a spouse, children, parents, as the first priority for death benefits, and then pay to the estate if one of those is not available.
Not available.
But that's, again, it's not what our statute currently says. We're violating no law by, complying with our statute as it is. It's merely a,
Can we request commentary from the public?
Do you have any comment?
Diane Seibel, MFPD. We always will have comment after we've had time to study these. So you can count on commentary, yes. Not today.
Well, it just seems like going an extra step for the members in order to try to find their beneficiaries if they're not listed. I think it's very honorable. I wonder about some of these legal issues, but the point that he made about it causing probate if they don't have a named beneficiary seems important. So, again, I think we're talking very small numbers here on an annual basis. So how do we resolve this?
So, I mean, our current statute deals with that. There's a line struck there on 34, and it says that the estate would not be probated but for the amount due from the retirement system. And all amount due must be paid directly without probate to the surviving next of kin.
Oh,
So,
so that solves it.
well, it was dealt with previously. And
Yeah.
I think we still, I don't know that we would derail that when we hear what these changes are. Denise?
No, that doesn't change. It doesn't, I mean, that provision is simply, in subpart
It's
two,
basically
it's
stated
clarified.
in subpart
Oh,
two.
okay.
It's still there.
Right, yeah. It's just laid out
If
more
the only
clearly.
reason it was gonna be probated is because of this benefit, then that is sort of taken care of in the statute.
That's good.
That is good.
Do we need to tell you, do we need to make a decision today?
No.
Okay.
I just need to know if anybody has any real heartburn about anything in particular, so then we can discuss it.
We're gonna have extra time.
We're doing it.
And the last thing is just the US,
Yeah.
And US?
So are you done with the beneficiary stuff?
Did I take up enough of our spare time?
I think so, that's good, you guys are back on schedule. Okay, so on page 16 and 17, I have the first write-ups, just the normal write-up, we'll have our normal university system supplemental contribution bill. Based on the last time this was evaluated, their contribution rate needs to go from 4.72% to 10.22%. That'll change a little once we have the numbers updated this fall, maybe over 11, might be close to 12 actually, but we'll see. And then on page 17 there, I updated this description for this meeting. So at our last meeting, we talked about, having maybe a second bill where we look at, instead of going all the way from 4.72 all the way to the 10.22, that maybe we would do 1%, an increase of 1% every couple of years until we get there. So I talked to Todd about that, Todd Green with Kavanaugh McDonald. And the only problem with doing it that way is 2033 is the date that's always used to amortize your unfunded liability by 2033. If we're only going 1% every 2 years, we're getting to the point where we can do that until we hit 8%, and then we're still going to be at a point where you have to jump it to 16 or 17 or 18% or something to actually amortize by that date. So instead of doing that, what he suggested was, why don't you look at going to a number, a higher number, and then reset, the amortization period. So that's what I did.
So is this 7% not increasing? That'll
No,
actually
so
get us
that
there
would- that
by
would be-
2049?
It would, so,
Oh.
because we're kicking out the date.
Yeah.
The problem with the 472 is it doesn't keep up with interest. So outside of like 2 or 3 years of like really outstanding 20+% rate of returns, because they get credit for the actuarial gains that way too. Outside of that, the 472 is never gonna work. So by jumping to 7%, you're taking care of the interest and you're paying down some of that unfunded liability. The problem is, instead of it going, you can't get there by 2033 at 7%, but you can by 2049. Okay. Now, with that said, I see Sherry's in the audience. Who knows what the SABIC committee is going to do, if they're actually going to authorize any of these bill drafts or not. So, I think we're statutorily required to bring the first one, the MUSRP, the actual contribution rate increase necessary to amortize by 2033. The second one is thinking outside of the box a little bit, and I think it illustrates the story that needs to be illustrated was, okay, well, if you're not, it's highly unlikely they're going to jump us up to 11%. This would get based on funding available.
Yeah.
But if you, outside of doing that, if you were to get us to 7%, which is still a hefty increase, it takes 30 years to pay off that liability.
Versus doing nothing, which is what they've done.
Right.
Can we show them how that amortization date has changed based on the 4.72? Can you have a chart that shows if we stuck with the 4.72, I guess there's no date, right?
Right.
Because
We'll
it's just
never
Right.
infinitely further
Right.
away every time we do it, yeah.
Right.
So there's not, you can't show different infinities, I guess.
Right.
It's still our best.
It's like your typical credit card.
Yeah.
That's my only question.
Hey, you're
My only
building
question
payment, you'll be paid
associated
off.
with it, because I'm not entirely sure having a 4% go for infinity is a terrible thing, but
Right, well, the way the statute's currently drafted, it doesn't shut off in 2033.
Well, my question would be, so let's say we go to Plan B and it passes, would we be back here trying to up it to 8 by 2049, because that continues to?
I would recommend we stop looking at it. Make it 7% and
Well, that's-
done with it.
through and put an end date on it and call it.
Yeah, that's
We've
kind
got
of my
something
point.
out of it instead of nothing.
If we're gonna get to that point, we need to cut it
Yeah.
Yeah.
off. Otherwise, we just keep doing what we're doing, and we just.
So we put an end date at 2049 potentially and say.
Yeah, I could
drop
work
the
on,
hook
I
that
could
day.
work on this language and make it be, the whole part about us periodically reviewing. If they truly would, go to whatever, 7%, and this all has to be evaluated based on our newest numbers, but if 7% takes you to 2049, this sub-3 can be modified to where we stop, if it's approved by the legislature, we can just stop looking at it.
We could give them
Well, and I guess part of my justification for that is, I could see a benefit of even having one that goes to 5, if we could drop that date, it's drop the review and stop going through this whole process where actually
Yeah,
it'd be worth it.
it would, because it costs us
How much money?
6 or 7, I think 7 to 10,000 every 2 years.
Exactly.
But 5 is not gonna move it from infinity. I mean, I think you
I-
wanna get to a point where it's,
I'm just saying.
like, give them some options, like, oh, the 7 will get us there in 30 years.
I'm just
6 will
saying,
get us
I-
there in 100 years.
I
5 will get
bring
us
that
there in
up because I
1,000
don't
years.
anticipate that they'll actually put it in 5. But it seems to me like a waste of time to keep bringing it up all the time, unless it is, of course, something we want to bring up, which I think there are times when we want to have the discussion.
We do in
I
the
just don't know that
changes.
we want to do it every single time and be forced to pay, $6,000, $7,000, $10,000 every time we go through this.
So obviously, we're lacking some leverage to get legislature to pass this. Is there anything that we could?
We don't ever have leverage.
Right.
Well, I mean, it's a matter of, if it's not built into the budget when it goes up there, it's pretty hard to get it in.
Yeah.
Funding that liability hasn't really been the priority, I don't think, of the administration's plural.
Well, and we have,
Well,
the university system.
It doesn't compete well with, do we raise tuition on students
Right.
to cover this?
Yeah, it could create some really bad press, actually.
So, I mean,
And the other reality is, it was put into play probably with bad legislation to begin with, and professors and university members suffering the whole time. Right? So it's almost, in my mind, I would rather, there's some benefit in some of the discussions, but I'd rather try to solve some problems rather than
So move it to 5 and make it permanent.
move it to 5, make it permanent, make it part of a plan to get teachers in the university system back into the system somehow, or make it voluntary, do something to change where we are in terms of supporting them.
And you think then it might pass, Scott?
Well, what's the motivation for it to pass now? There is none. I mean, if in fact we can solve retirement issues with the professors at the university and get them back into our situation, that could be helpful to both.
it could, I think if any effort to do that it should be, it's not an option, it's new hires instead of being in the MUSRP, now you're back in the TRS, you have the option to choose between the two, otherwise we're right back where this all started.
No,
I don't think they ever fund it appropriately in the first place, so I don't know why.
PRS hasn't
We're
moved.
beating this up. You're talking about cutting losses next year.
Probably would be there too.
Yeah, me too.
So,
With PERS though as well, you're not talking about their the university system's higher salary individuals. The adverse selection against TRS, if it were optional, would be huge. Young people would choose the defined contribution plan and
Closer to retirement.
All right, we have
Talk
90s.
about the choice, it's whether or not they will stay.
Returns were gonna be 17% a year, correct?
Young people obviously.
That's what I would say.
Yeah.
If we were to go down that road, we would want to make it to where they were required to legislate TRS. And then, I don't know. I mean, that could all be investigated. I don't know how much support there would be from the actual membership. I mean, that they got all this passed back in the late 80s, early 90s when the stock market was doing really well for them. They thought they could do way better than they would in TRS. But so,
Well, the other-
2011 rolled around.
I think a lot of why it passed was the portability issues. And that's a lot of the justification.
But the real problem again is whatever decision was made, other people are suffering for it, this system. The right thing to do is just fund it the way they promised to fund it. Clearly, that's not gonna happen. So maybe 7% is certainly our best option. And whether, you know, I wouldn't say shut it off date certain. It just says at this particular horizon, we could pay it off in 30 years. I don't think we let them out of the obligation period.
Right, so the other thing that we all need to remember too is the unfunded liability related to the university system is also included in our overall unfunded liability. So if things worked out the way we hope they will, based on all of our projections, we could be in a position where the system itself as a whole is fully funded and we still had this other unfunded liability we're tracking. I think it's gonna be a hard sell at that point to continue to pay these university system supplemental contributions. So just as something to think about.
It was actually bad.
It's
Part of
I
the
think the
reason
second
why
one there is a better option.
I bristle a little bit every time we talk about this. There's benefits to having some of that discussion with legislature, but I also know legislators are getting tired of hearing about how retirement systems are not funded. And we kind of need to get off that back too. Unless it's truly a huge issue.
Yeah, I mean, I guess,
Every time we throw something into the hopper, there's the potential for not so good things to show up. in
But
the
it's a really good
hopper.
example of why killing off a plan is a terrible idea.
It's the best.
Oh, it is,
Yeah.
it is.
It's the best example.
yeah, I mean, it may not be a bad idea to have something like this second version where we increase it to whatever, 7 isn't a magic number, whatever it needs to be to amortize in 30 years, and then we modify this language for us to stop looking at it, and we just leave it alone. It's 7% until 2049, doesn't matter if the system's 100% funded or 80% funded.
And it wouldn't have to say stop looking at it. It doesn't have to be every year. We can certainly revisit it
Well,
from time to time, but
I kind of agree with Jeff. If it pays itself off, it's probably not going to happen earlier.
Yeah. No, I mean,
Unless all of a sudden stock markets.
right, I guess if it were on track, right, subsection 3 there, we wouldn't necessarily need to bring a bill to the legislature if it was on track.
or if we determine it's reasonably on track.
Right. Now, if it's substantially overpaying or underpaying, then I think
Yeah.
you would bring a bill to adjust.
So maybe you can check it every 5 years.
So you would still, even if you are
Or
checking it, you don't necessarily, doesn't necessarily absolutely bring a bill every single cycle. If it's on track, if it's not, which it hasn't been, then you're sort of stuck bringing a bill.
I think that's a better solution.
Yeah, it's worth a shot.
Diane?
Diane Gladwell, MFPE, MEA, MFT. This issue needs more discussion involving the university system as well. We have so many competing interests. And for us to assume that it's gonna get paid off, our members are paying more into the system, the state is paying more into the system. I mean, there are lots of considerations here. And so I think, let's not make an easy decision, let's look closer at it. I agree that our colleagues in the university system, our members, are not doing well with the system that they have, and they would benefit from a defined benefit plan. Is that pie in the sky idea? Maybe today, but it's something that we could work toward in partnership with the university system. So I'd like to be a part of any ongoing discussion we have. And in terms of pointing to the legislature, that it has been a frustration for so many folks when this remains not funded, both for our folks at the university that see their potential salary and benefits going to TRS, and from your perspective, where TRS isn't getting enough to resolve the problem that was developed when we closed the system to the members. There's a lot of work that has to be done here, and rather than having a brief discussion, I'd like to really look at it more seriously with the university and others, so that we can maybe lay a plan out to try to come to a broader consensus about what might work. It may not happen in one legislative session, but I'd like to work on it more closely with you. Thank you.
One thing I would throw out on that point is that, certainly, telling what Diane says, but keep in mind that we have people in the university system who have previously elected between TRS and the university system. We have people who are in the university system who, by the one election opportunity provisions under IRS law, may be deemed to have elected participation even though it was an involuntary election. So what people are currently in the university system may be eligible to come to TRS if that's what, ultimately something that's being looked at is going to be a lengthier term kind of process to look at and decisions to make, because there's IRS law involved that I can't tell you what the outcome would be right now.
Yeah, I think it's complicated. I mean, it certainly can be done. It's been done in other states. It's not a straightforward process.
It is just a great example of one group of people who made a decision and whatever, but it affects so many others. These newer college professors, all of the teachers in the retirement system, that decision affected us. So it's frustrating because it's never going to go away.
The idea that we could stop looking at it isn't really accurate, is it? Because it's always factored into our overall liability, so they would have to look at it regardless of whether we pulled it off to the side. Would they, or would it save us? Would it actually save us $7 to $10 grand a year?
No, I would say every other year. It would save us because we do a special valuation just for the university system, and it's a subset of our overall liability.
And that's not taken into the hole's done on its own, and then that's done on its own.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, well, we're right on time for a break.
Okay.
10:15, we'll adjourn. Call the meeting back to order and look at strategic planning.
Okay, so Madam Chair, members of the board, I have a short write-up on page 41 and 42, and then our mission, vision, and guiding principles are on page 43, and our strategic planning commitment worksheet is on page 45 and 46. So every other year, we sort of do the abbreviated strategic planning process. Last year was our more intensive strategic planning session where we had Jim Cairns come in. We spent a good 5-6 hours last August on strategic planning. So our goal this year isn't to completely replicate last year's planning session. We'd rather go back through the objectives that remain, or all of our objectives, talk about the ones that have been completed, the ones that remain, and then decide whether or not we need to reprioritize anything in the strategic planning worksheet. in addition to that, there's a couple things that we're gonna show you today that are related to strategic planning items on the commitment worksheet. Darla has been looking at some different logo designs, and she's got a handout for that we'll look at. And then as well, we have a draft school board webpage that will shine on the wall, which we'll look at. And that's been one of the strategic planning items for a while. And just see, get your thoughts, feedback on that before we stand it up. So with that, I guess I'll ask the chair, do you want to go through the commitment worksheet first, or do you want to look at some of the logo work and the board webpage first?
I'd like to look at this stuff first myself, but.
Okay, so Bella, if you're
That's great.
ready, we can. So right there.
Which would you prefer, school board's webpage or logos?
Say that again?
I have some draft logos or the school board's webpage, which
Let's do the webpage since we're on.
Okay, Madam Chair, members of the board, here is a very draft webpage that Sean and I put together for you. I just had Rex up here getting this ready. He said it's the opposite of this tag.
It's confused me. It's a trick question.
Any ideas? It was working 5 minutes ago.
There we go.
There you go.
Little cord.
Turn it on.
You might need to shut that light off maybe. Lost it
Easy
again.
to think, little that cord again.
It's all right.
It's that cheesy
Sean works pretty good. It's that picture, right? We need to get into that.
It's that cheesy picture.
We'll put a picture of Carrie up there.
I have one.
I'll be all for that. Switch.
All right.
Been out of baseball games before that picture?
Yeah,
And it looks much better on the screen that I'm looking at than it does up here.
The same shot doesn't look good up there?
Something like that.
There was a comment about a sunburn, so. So Sean drafted kind of a message here at the top. I'm just gonna scroll down to the bottom real quick to show you all what's here, but then we can come back up and pay more attention to content if you want. I put in, you'll see the red there, ask TRS email link. John said it would be an easy thing, and we think it's been just suggested in this group before to have some sort of email address that someone, and it would only be posted on this page for school board members. And then these are just hyperlinks to the topics that are farther down the page. So just quickly, what is the system? What's the DD plan versus DC? Administration, how it works, benefits, challenges, considerations, all very draft, as I said, and there can be links to additional resources at the bottom. So that's just a quick preview, and I'm going to jump back to the top here.
It's pretty general information, but it's geared kind of towards the things they should be
Yeah, I just
thinking
think
about.
if we can focus things to them, I think,
Yeah.
just they help with
How will they know this site exists, and are they the only ones that get to click on it?
Our thought is right now, the menu on the left here is, I think it could use some consolidation and some cleanup. So that would
School
be
board
something we
members
do, we
would be
would
one of
put
the
a
boxes,
link
okay.
there. I think it's information that anyone might benefit from reading.
Yeah,
that's
no one
pretty
would
general.
lock out of it, for sure.
For example, you could fit it, I'm pointing here at the site index, that's something, just one idea we've tossed around is up here at the very top of the page, could be a link to the site index so that it isn't taking up real estate on that menu. There's things like that we could consolidate.
Or under employers, because they talked about the fact that you would, you're an employer too.
Could be.
Like about TRS, contact TRS, I mean, those could really probably be one menu item, you know, because it's a lot the same, not the same necessarily, but they could be all consolidated in one menu item. And then if you had one there that just said school board, school boards or school board members, you would hope that
We-
would probably click it.
We don't have sub-menus right now, so for example, if we click on employers, we don't have a expandable menu that would, not that it couldn't be built with this style sheet for the website, it doesn't work that way, so it takes some work to do that. So our thought was have its own menu item, but if, yeah, that would,
Shouldn't side index be either at the top or the bottom instead of in the middle?
we were thinking
Or the-
they would be moved up here, a link up at the very top, because we have limited real estate in the menu, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a menu item. It could be at the top of the page, and also at the bottom of the page.
And under TRS board, the only telephone number you've got is Jeff's, right?
That's the only one.
Now it's John, no, that's.
Yeah.
Will we email out this link to all new and existing board members, or send them a little?
We don't have their.
Yeah.
contact
If someone were to provide me that information, I can. This is just on our test system behind our firewall right now, so
Okay.
I could provide a PDF of this content. There's ways I could get you the information if you want to review it, but I wouldn't be able to send you the link to it right now.
We could send a link to it to all the employers and ask
Right.
them to provide it to their school
I
board
think that would be
members.
a way to do
But
it.
otherwise, we don't have any way of.
We'll be able to do it through OPI.
The school board
It's the
association.
school boards
Right.
association.
School board association.
Probably,
Can do it.
and, or Sam. Just a lot of times having them know about it, and share that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Could we look at what you've got in terms of content?
So again, those 5 links are just anchors to the.
When do you expect this to be up and running?
It's upon, would need to be approved and, you know, figure out the technical issues with the menu and so on. But,
Relatively soon.
just let me know when you want me to
You
go.
might want to have, because I think you want to be able to make easy to these things you already have up there. I don't know how you do an FAQ kind of thing. Unless your page is essentially your FAQ. That's certainly a possibility too. But I think things like, there's some things that when Gatsby was 68, 69, were coming out, there's huge questions as to what is numbers and why do you have to publish these and why is that out here in care?
Yeah.
Here at the very bottom, I have a placeholder for links to other content, either inside or outside. So these are just ideas I threw out, so that could be something we could add next time.
So where do you put contact info?
There's a whole page for that.
On the top?
But then we have a link at the top as well.
And there's a calculator on here too, right? So they can,
Under active members.
Yeah, school board members would have, unless they're a member, can't use the
You
calculator.
have to have your own account to be able to do that.
right.
And that's not within this public website, that's in the My TRS computer website. Here, so there's a contact TRS general menu item, but we've discussed having an email, an inbox that could be, they could submit a question.
That was great.
That was great, yeah, that was great.
Very good. Okay.
See the logo.
Yeah, and so whatever we put up there is, it's not like it's gonna be, it has to be that way forever.
no.
We can modify and adjust as necessary. Sure.
We're gonna make Sean ready.
Well, that's the nice part about,
Yeah.
Good question, well, Sharon.
Right.
Yeah, let's
And
do it every
then-
time.
and then that's how you populate your FAQs a bit more, so.
I'm done.
Yeah, the boss told me to do it.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
I waited and see.
Scroll, the touchpad wasn't working the way I wanted it to. Okay, just gonna put that on.
That's actually literally is not moving, sorry. I didn't know if you were gonna show the pictures up there, but you have the printouts.
Yeah, it would look so bad, I have hard copies.
What's that called?
This-
So I'll have to see. Yeah,
Just the letters. So there's a kind of an eagle or something like that in the window. Or something.
No, those are just.
Oh,
So, you want this one? This one seems like two.
Oh. The top of this document, I've just kind of explained the rationale and what led to this. The existing logos we have, as you can see, the state outline isn't very clear. The letters overlap, and especially in the color one, there's some embossing or shadowing there that is hard to reproduce. And what triggered this, I mean, that's always been kind of a problem. I had to take the black and white one and beef up that state outline to use on our forms. And so to make a long story short, when we got to the point of saying, you know, it would be nice to have a banner for the LFPE conference and maybe other workshops that happen, these graphics just aren't very good quality, so to put it on a big banner, that made me think maybe it's time to clean up these graphics and modernize the logo. So State Print and Mail Services has graphic artists, and the gal we work with named Brandy Hay was currently working with Fish, Wildlife and Parks next door to kind of freshen up their logo, so she had some good ideas. So the idea on page 2 was not to completely change. It's not a complete redesign, it's just a freshening up of what we have. You'll notice it's in reverse now, which I personally like, but again, it's all debatable, you don't have to make any decisions today. So there's, the suggestion is, of course, you always have a black and white version on the forms and letterhead and things like that, or, you know, envelopes, different documents. So we could, the state outline one is similar to what we have now. The other two, we do need a horizontal version like we have on page 1. We have an existing one with the name spelled out. So we could have an approved set of logos that is all 3 of those. We could pick just 2 of the horizontal ones, or just 1 of those, I mean, and have just 2 for an approved set. All different options. You'll notice the typeface on this set is a serif font, and it's, I think, looks nice and sturdy and bold, but it's kind of scholarly looking to me. I kind of like it. If you'll turn to page 3, you'll see there's, the color is just a suggestion, but the font on that one is a sans serif font, and that was just provided by Print and Mail Services as another alternative, just to consider. Whatever we pick, it would be the same for all of the logos. On page 3, I have a bullet point that it's common for organizations to have both black and white and color versions. Often a company will have their color version, and of course they need a black and white version too for printing. So I just thought that was something for us to consider. This teal color kind of coordinates with our website, but it doesn't have to be that. And again, it would be whatever set of logos whether we pick two or all three, they would all have the same font, maybe we would have a black and white and a color version of it. What are your thoughts so far on just the look?
Simple and easy to use.
Let's see.
Do you?
I agree. I like the C better. I like it spelled out like that. And also the fact that, you know, we eliminate the eastern side, so people from Glasgow and Glendive and Sydney.
So it's gonna
No,
make
they're not
Daryl's
eliminated,
number
but
one.
just stretch
They
it
just
out.
start constraining.
Goes all the way to Minnesota.
Are we gonna get complaints
It
about
shows
this?
the true travel issues.
And I like the white letters on the dark on the state line too.
That looked pretty,
I like how
pretty
that
crisp.
looks. What, as far as though, like mass producing, having all that, well, is that gonna be kind of expensive or not?
I don't think so. I mean, what we could do is have a not reverse version of it as well, if that was a concern. I don't think that one gets used in very large size often.
Is there anybody that's gonna be confused by the fact that that one is just an anachronism versus spelling it out?
Well, it doesn't, if it's on a form, usually we are using currently this version, and the address is off to the side.
Okay.
Yeah.
So no.
It- Usually it's paired with the other more important information. So I don't want to get too in the weeds on this color version, but I wanted to get the board's impressions of, again, this is what kind of what triggered this whole project was this
Could
color
we
version.
do a little
just
lighter
to-
teal, like a 1955 Thunderbird?
Sure. Give me the PMS codes for
Well, the
that.
color of his shirt.
Yeah.
A little darker.
This color version is not used in print very often, although sometimes it is. I noticed Kevin and McDonald uses it on their documents that they find up in the
Picture
handout.
version or the full color?
Yes.
Yeah.
The funny thing about this is, it was my understanding, some of you were here at the time, it was created by the original communications manager, and no one knows where that file is. So I actually even talked to Emma McKenzie and said, because I remember her saying to me at one time that she didn't have the graphics, so I actually asked her again recently and said, did you tell me that? Is that true? We can't find that. She said, yeah, she had found it like pasted into a Word document. So where the original photo is, nobody knows. Whether it was done in Photoshop or Illustrator or what, we don't know.
Yeah.
I think
So-
that's a dated center. Emma was here at the time, but I'm pretty sure that it was in there.
Yeah. Emma didn't make it. She, it may have been in her tenure when it was approved, but she didn't create the graphic.
It was when Will Farman was here.
I think Tom, or
Will.
I think David was working with
Will.
Will.
Remember he wasn't here very long.
Emma thought it was Will, but again, she wasn't sure.
But either way, I was not super excited about the overlap.
Yeah.
Right, I mean.
Yeah, it's just not a great quality to begin with, and it's muddy, and if you try and blow it up, it's
Really light?
yeah. So that really was the impetus for this whole thing. What is it a good time?
It's
to
a
be
good time.
freshening up, modernizing the look. So Brandy at Print and Mail Services had tried to kind of mimic that original look in its first two examples, and you'll see on page 5. 3A has a weird shading at the top. That's just an artifact of the fact that this is a low resolution proof. So kind of ignore that. But she tried to kind of keep to that same theme using sort of sunrise or clouds. And our thought was maybe we could, at the next meeting, you could decide whether you want this sort of full color option as well, and we could pick one that's sort of the usual look. But then, for purposes of like the banner or other special uses, we could do something like these kind of more photographic ones that are very Montana. These are actually Montana photos.
Like McDonald.
One's Lake McDonald, the other is English or somewhere, although I don't know where. But they are available through Shutterstock, so you can purchase the rights to use them, and there's no copyright issues. And you'll notice the top two samples were produced by Print and Mail Services, so it has that font from the black and white ones you saw. I don't have that font in my set of typefaces, so the other two samples were just two photos I picked for examples. So the font is a little bit different, and it's just more for illustration. So whatever it is, it would be
I do like that
consistent.
font.
So the idea was either one of the top two or something similar. If you agree with that idea, could be sort of the default look of it, or we could insert a photo now and then. Some seasonal or other photo, rather than saying, this is the photo and always. So,
Yeah, there might be a generally a little visual some kind of deal, but it'd be nice to be able to shift stuff up and have things different.
Yeah, just switch it out.
Again, you've excluded Eastern Montana.
hey,
Only
use some-
only the examples. We
Well,
want
it's
to
do
three-
fields
3D
of
is
wheat.
Eastern Montana.
put some Makoshi in there.
3D is?
3D.
Oh.
You're very right.
This guy.
One of, just for fun, I brought some of the other options that Randy made. One was that same, but in red, and I thought, oh, that looks like disaster coming.
Yeah.
Fire season.
Fire season.
Apocalypse.
And then
The fifth season for
one was, Sean thought this looked like getting blinded by the sun, some
there's a
person.
religious thing going on in that bottom one.
Yeah, so, anyway,
Angelic.
Yeah. So there was some internal culling of some of the options before.
Well, I mean, Darla touched on it a little bit, she didn't really spell it out exactly, but I mean, for these picture ones, we could approve the template and the font, right? But the photo itself could just switch out, you know, it's really start fresh, different photo, like our website is, every time you log in, there's a different.
I like it.
I like it.
Yeah, that's good.
So general direction seems,
Seems good, I like the font, I think that color looks fine. Would that be, you'd almost never use the black and white, or you'd have both options? If we
I
approve
think
the
it would
color?
just be depending on the use. Obviously, most of our forms are printed black and white, so it would be the black one, but.
So are we clear on exactly what the board, so it sounded like some of you liked 1C.
1C and 1A.
Yeah,
Yeah.
1A, 1C, and then color looks fine, so that'd be 2A and 2C, but with the font from one.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, I like all these, I like the picture idea a lot.
I like the picture idea too.
Yeah.
We need to pick one of those for like the banner. Right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
we probably want one of these for
And
a
it-
banner.
Yeah, and that conference is obviously coming up in October, and I think the next meeting is.
Well, you can't go around with Lake McDonald.
Well,
No, I agree.
unless you're from eastern Montana.
Oh, they like Lake McDonald.
They do.
Everybody likes that.
Everybody likes that.
Personally, I mean, there are hundreds. To just pick two to put on this handout was tough for me.
Yeah.
But I kind of like the road in 3D. I don't know.
Yeah, I can get you.
But,
It's true, it's,
Well, and the cloud one is more similar to what people are accustomed to. So if you're making the change of how you're doing the lettering, at least the cloud piece is somewhat consistent transfer.
And there's also a big sky right there.
so one consideration for a banner would be just to make, it shouldn't be too detailed of a photo so that it's, people can see what it is from across the conference hall.
That's why I like
I
the
actually like the
3D.
size of the lower font. I like the
Yeah,
cross
actually-
font better, but I
Yeah.
like the size of the lower.
Yeah, and you'll notice, both samples, actually the black and white one, I actually had her enlarge that a little bit, and so these don't reflect that, because I only had her do it on this, just for show. But it would be, whatever size and font we pick would be the same.
Yeah.
consistent. That sounds good.
So yeah, you agree that the larger.
Yes.
Sarah, the larger, yeah. So do you want to pick one for the banner, or?
Other words, thoughts.
And D on the banner would be all right.
D, 3D?
I like D.
That should be
You like
one,
D or D?
a picture.
It's the
I think Jeff's saying B, are you saying E?
boy.
Boy.
Okay.
Blue clouds. B and a D.
This is where
I was just gonna say, my wife told me not to decorate.
I like D, sounds like an executive decision.
Myself.
Yeah.
I'd say.
I do too. I like D.
How big's the banner?
We don't know exactly yet, but it'd be,
Do you like enough to cover the front of that
It
table?
hangs down on a table, not up a line.
we were gonna have a couple of things. I think there's gonna be a banner, vinyl behind the booth. That most likely would be, well, it could be the full color one, but it might be just maybe the teal one.
Okay.
But then the drape over the table, like Sean mentioned, might have the full color
Oh, okay.
and or the sort of stand-up portable, you know, like those conference kind of stand-up signs.
Is the teal going to match when you look at these pictures? Is the teal going to match with those pictures?
I tried to find pictures that had that tone in them. The sunrise one was not one I
Right.
made,
But
but
that to me, whatever, I mean, maybe that teal, it needs to match.
yeah. And when we get to the point of having, because print and mail services would be the ones that would contract this vendor that makes the sign, so we would, that's a good point we would make.
Yeah,
Make
because
it
if
clear
the
that
teal
we want those
doesn't
to
match, the teal needs to change.
Yeah, I agree. Make them coordinated colors. Perfect. All right.
All right, thanks, Laura. So then, the next piece of our strategic planning session, I think, is we'll go through the actual commitment worksheet, which starts on page 45 and 46 of your packet. And then there are a few updates, and then, we can just look at the priority we currently have assigned for those that aren't completed, and just make sure that I'm on the same page as the board's on for moving forward. So, page 45, the first one there was implement long-term plans to increase workplace efficiency, which included new or remodeled workspace for TRS operations, and the latest update on that is that we are looking at going forward as a long-range building plan bill request. We would be included with the rest of the long-range building plan, or program, with their legislation. And so I still have that as a priority one. I'm planning to move forward with that. Everyone's still comfortable with that. Okay, great. The next one was improve workflow document / data management. It's still on that implement long-term plan stage. Workplace efficiency. Part of that was expand our online form capacity, offer online submission of many TRS forms, and also workflow through the enterprise content management system. And so the update on that is we have completed the online beneficiary designation function in Entrust, so that's available. It has not been migrated to production just yet, but it is essentially done at this point. So that will be our first online transactional type of process that we'll have available. And it is not anything like you have this fillable PDF form that you print out and mail. It's actually, you go out, you enter information, it gets saved in a table behind the scenes, a staging table. It's actually really cool. I mean, it's the first that will eventually end up being many online forms, but that is done.
Sean, will the individual who fills that out be able to have and keep a copy of that?
Yes, they'll be able to print. In fact, at the very end of that, they confirm their
They can save it to
designation.
their own computer?
Yeah, they can save it or print it. And the reason, I guess, that we haven't rolled it out just yet is we're very close to migrating to Perceptive, which is the content management so that's our imaging system. That's one of the other things we talked about, FileNet. We remember I had asked for an exception to try to stay on FileNet, and I was denied. There was an executive order, everybody in states can go to Perceptive. So John and Rex have been working on that migration, and John, you're scheduled to migrate in a couple of weeks, right? Next weekend. So once that's in place, then we will look to do the online beneficiary designation, and having Percepted up and running and us using it is sort of step one for future workflow. Where, and for those of you, in case you don't remember, the whole workflow conversation is, rather than have these hard copy folders float around the office, as things come into TRS, they would be scanned, and then everything would be moved around the office electronically through the content management system. And that, Rex and John have done the work, it will handle that. I mean, there's a lot of work that we need to do to set that up. Every single form has to have every single step outlined ahead of time. It's part of what we'll do in the future. Any questions on that one? I think it's still, as a priority too, with the September 19 completion date, I think that's probably still appropriate. We're getting some pieces of it done now. Workflows as a whole is not going to be anywhere close to being done by September 19, but I think next summer when we do this strategic planning session again, we can outline some more specific steps for workflow and have more specific targets for pieces of it. Okay. The third one there is deals with the public records management and document imaging retention, and so that work is still underway, although admittedly we haven't had a chance to really spend any time on it recently. This deals with setting up, what's it called? It's the image. It's kind of a matrix of all of our various documents, how long they need to be retained. It goes back to the conversation of making the electronic images of our documents the official record of the system. That's still all underway. We just haven't had a chance to do much more with it. I mean, that's really the update. I mean, I think we need to continue to try to work on it and get it in place at some point, but until Perceptive's up and running, I don't think we can do too much on it. So 18, 19 is still probably all right. And I'll just tell you right now, I mean, we may be at the same point next summer, and it needs to be something we have to add again for the following year, because I don't see us having that complete between now and then. Okay, the next one is implement voice over internet protocol systems and software to provide and improve voice communication, media delivery, communication management services. And then one of those things would record and store member phone calls and eliminate manual logs, possibly tied to MTROS development policies. So the update on that is just recently, in the last couple of weeks, we just got our VoIP phones. So everyone in TRS is now on a VoIP phone. The thought or the sort of request or thought process of using the VoIP phones to record and store member phone calls, that isn't going to happen, at least not with the current administration. They have said that they won't allow agencies to do that. So ITSDs would have to use, they get this stood up, and ITSDs and executive branch agencies, they're just not going to offer it. So with that said, we still are moving in the right direction, because as part of the enhancement phase of interest, we have asked for, and they will build us, a call log function where instead of having this off-system Word document or spreadsheet that each of the benefit officers and some of the other employees at TRS use, where they type up notes on call logs and then say, I get a phone call and I need to figure out who talked to Nancy Smith about whatever the issue was. I have to go to each one of them, they have to look at their individual call log. Well, instead of doing it that way, we're going to build in a call log by member in the system. So if I'm talking to Nancy Smith on the phone, I can click the button and everything. I mean, it doesn't matter if I put it in or Denise put it in or Janelle put it in, it'll all show up. So I think we're going to get to the same, not the same exact, but a better place than we currently are. We just don't have the functionality of recording every single phone call.
Were those going to be transcribed somehow, or just recorded?
They could have been. I mean, I think, I would say we didn't have that necessarily figured out.
Because sitting there while you're on the phone with somebody and trying to listen to the last phone call doesn't going to work either.
No, right. No. It won't.
What was the administration's objection to this file storage? Or
You know, I don't really know for sure if it was, I would hate to even answer, I don't know for sure.
Because then,
So,
of
I
course,
mean,
so many
where
places
it
you
would
call,
be-
it tells you you're being recorded.
Right, it could be recorded for calling. Really for us, where it could be, add value for us would be when you get the message from, not the message, but when you're talking to a member or they're writing to us and they're telling us, well, I was told this, not that. And a lot of times what they're telling you they were told is like, well, possibly you were told that, but only if some of the other facts were sort of blurring it, right?
Right.
So, I mean, it would be nice in some instances to have that actual conversation. It's not, we've never had it before, so obviously it's not the end of the world that we don't have it. It would be handy in some respects to have that actual transcript or actual recording to get the fallback. And it would be nice too, some systems use it this way, and I think we would too if we had it, would be just to sort of spot check phone calls with members, and then that can help you identify areas that maybe the staff needs more training or maybe further clarification from a quality control kind of perspective. Okay, so then, let's see, the next one is develop internal and external audit capacity, develop tools for internal evaluation, possible partnership with Impera, engage members in reviewing their retirement service records. So that's a priority too. It's 2018, 2019 timeframe. We haven't done anything further in there. I mean, part of that, I think, outside of partnering with Impera, on the audit staff that they have, I think it would require adding additional staff at TRS. We haven't had a chance to really explore this any further. Any questions or comments on that? Okay. All right, so then on page 46, the first one is implement a coordinated outreach program, develop and implement outreach, external and change management, internal efforts, communicate effectively, manage organizational improvements, and the outcome will be improved customer service, internal change management, continuous quality improvement, enhanced communication. So I don't have anything specific. I think this is something that is sort of always ongoing. We didn't really have like a specific deliverable. I mean, we're working on things like the school board page. We're working on the short videos. We're working on those types of things. As far as internal change management areas, one of the biggest things that we have been working on since I've been here is that Trust project, and part of that requires migrations. They used to be weekly, they still are to some degree weekly. I'm trying to get them more to a bi-monthly or monthly status, but part of the change management piece of that is that Tammy's typing up release notes now that everybody can see, so everybody knows exactly what changes and impact. So, I mean, I guess my point is that these are, I think we're doing a lot of little things. I don't know if there's one super big thing to point to on this one. I think it's on, continue. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Denise just said, part of the outreach, if we do move forward with that withdrawal legislation for the 90-day waiting period, that could be one of the things that we need to communicate to our members. So the outreach piece of it will be in a newsletter or possibly a notice, a letter, this is coming, it's going to have a really effective date. All right, the next one is the school board webpage, which we just drafted that. I think we'll have it done, obviously not the fall of 2017, but maybe the fall of 2018 will be there and available. The next one is a document matrix, essentially. It's a conduct a comprehensive assessment of communication needs, resources, develop an inventory communication plan. Darla has this, I forgot to update, I mean, Darla, you track that in your own, sort of separate document
Right.
that she showed me, we just recently reviewed.
Yeah, and we tried to look at the duplication of content between different products and figure out ways to streamline that.
Yeah, try to get it to where when there's an update to be made, our hope is to have to update it in one place, not have to update it in different places. Okay, and then the next one is new member training materials intended to promote value TRS, DE plan to new members. So this is another thing that Darla has already, she's about 3/4 of the way done with developing a early/mid-career presentation that we're gonna try out this year at the big MEA conference in Billings.
Are you gonna promote that like via our newsletter?
If we have, I'm hoping we have a newsletter between now and then, yeah.
So I think Diane can probably promote it in whatever material you're sending to the conference attendees. I mean, it would be one of your,
Yeah, the presentation itself is scheduled.
yeah, it's scheduled as one of the.
There are about 500 workshops at the session, but yes,
Mhm.
yeah, no, it'll be longer than.
There's 500
Special
workshops?
day.
Yeah.
But there are a lot. Every hour.
And it'll be on our website as well.
It's a quick opportunity to tell me how much I appreciate all the work TRS has done in giving us their time at the MFT conference. It makes a huge difference that folks know you'll be there. It makes things easier for us and
When I think it's early, mid, those are the people that are starting, are starting to ask questions. Even second year teachers are starting to ask questions. First year, it's.
Yeah, and I think we can, doing it at the conference where you have a sort of a wide range, you have some early career, some late career. I think we can gauge like what the level of interest is, and then we might be able to make some decisions about it. So when we go to, especially in the large districts where you have a chance of drawing more people, and maybe we want to not just do the ready set retirement, we want to do both. One session for the earlier mid and another session for the people that are ready for retirement.
Speaking of sessions during that time, that's also at the same time as the MSO conference with the Beneficiaries and School Association. That would be the time to promote that for.
Sure, yep.
Are those welcome billings? They're usually at the same place, right?
No, they're not usually, it's unusual.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's what I did.
The administrator one is, because it's still.
Okay, the next one is the promote third leg of retirement, deferred comp, 401k, et cetera. We have not done anything with this. This is one of those ones, this never goes away, but we haven't quite figured out. The only thing I worry about with this, and we just need to get something drafted and then we can refine it, is that I don't want to confuse people too much.
Right. Possibly implement a link on the website.
Yeah, it could be that simple. It's just-
And it could even be a link to another site. So it's-
Separate.
But I do think that even a paragraph in the handbook is helpful. I think it's important for people to understand that this alone, unless you're gonna work like 60 years, this alone might not cover you.
No, I think you're right. It could
I'm
be.
thinking about the 60.
Set a specific, like, information, but at one point we talked about, trying to sort of funnel people towards the deferred comp plan offered by Impera. And I think that, without a whole lot of explanation, that can really stir people up. Just, it can confuse them big time.
Well, there has to be some other things happening for that.
It does.
All you can really do is find a way to encourage them to explore it on their own in some creative
That's what I
ways.
Yeah,
do here.
If I could jump in briefly, there's the early and mid-career presentation. I do have a kind of a placeholder slide that just sort of, in a general way, mentions
three-legged stool. So,
Yeah, that, just keep bringing that one up.
Yep.
Again, that's not finished yet, but that is something I
Yeah.
had heard you all say here before, so.
So that one's still in process. Let's see. Okay, so the next one is increase member knowledge of and involvement with systems. Send a notice to members when they become vested, show members when they are vested, when they log into the system, provide a summary of the record for review, and notify them of service purchase eligibility, and involve members in doing service audits. So some of this has been accomplished by the MyTRS functionality. We need to, you can tell if you're vested when you log into the system, but Tammy and I talked about this the other day. I think we can easily enough add language once they're in there, if they have 5 or more years, just to write across the top, you are a vested member. So we could refine that a little bit. They can now look at their actual service record by year in MyTRS, so that's available. And it will tell them if there is a service purchase available.
We could just put a post on Facebook, Nancy Smith is vesting. Might be more effective.
Congratulations.
Well, yeah. It could. So, I mean, it is, I think we've made some strides in this area. I wouldn't say we're completely done yet. We'll continue to do what we can. But MyTRS has a forward vested ability to show them a lot more than they ever have in the past. And they still get their annual statements once a year. That tells you your years of service credit, calculates a benefit for you based on a couple different ways, both if you continue to work or if you work a little more. And if you get an annual statement that only has half the years you think you have, that should prompt you to call the system and figure out what's going on. Okay, and then the last one there was maintain and enhance TRS human resource systems, develop and expand staff competency through on-the-job training, continue ed, certification, and pay plan design, and informed by salary survey. So we did adopt a new pay plan policy last May. The board was involved in that. We do have the continuing education program at TRS that up to this point no one has utilized, but it is available where, if they get approved ahead of time by the board, or pay for most, if not all, of their tuition costs for certain pre-approved classes. So that's available. We do for some of our key staff, they go to at least one conference per year, which includes Denise, accounting and all, goes to at least one. Tammy typically goes to one, I go to one. Darla's gonna go to the annual conference this year. She actually went to, she's gone to, what was the name of that conference she went to? Was she just here in town?
It was a kind of a public relations organization put on this PR-related session, which was really good.
So I think things are moving along as they should be in that area. So with all of that, does the board have any one of those items that you specifically want to discuss further, or does everything still look pretty good? I mean, this is something we look at every meeting.
And you're doing what you can, I mean, this.
Trust sums up a lot of the time, but it hits a lot of these bullets.
Yeah.
Just regular, everyday stuff. But a lot has come from this in the past, our communications director,
Oh, yeah.
Everything. The attorney, at one point, wasn't, I wouldn't say that, but how important that is, how much you do. Lots of it has come.
That is a starting point.
And I'm thinking now in the future, maybe an auditor position of some sort.
That's something that we can likely use in the future. Okay.
All right, so now that's another action item. We're on to M-Trust though. And we've got to review and revise the schedule of the budget amendments.
Yes, so Madam Chair and members of the board, I passed out, we didn't have this done, so it wasn't printed and included in your packet, but I passed out a schedule, which looks like this. This is the updated schedule, and then also passed out the budget status report of the current budget, the requested budget, and then the overall budget. And so I see Jane is here, she's our project manager. What I might do is have her just walk you through all the schedule itself real quick, so she can explain what the different colors mean, what the dependencies are, and sort of give you an idea of what process we went through to update this schedule. And then when she's done with that, I'll talk about the numbers.
Certainly. Madam Chair and board members, obviously we readjusted this schedule partway through the project. So a number of these tasks have already been completed, and you can see that they have check marks in the left-hand column there. So one of the reasons that we needed to re-baseline this project schedule was, well, there are always many reasons. A couple of the highlights are the development team, which is a team of 2 people, found itself spending more time on maintenance than anticipated, and so there was a reduced amount of time to spend on interest. So we had to take that into account in the rescheduling. The 2 different colors in the chart represent the 2 different developers. So each developer is primary on each of these individual modules, and that's so that they're not treading on each other's toes when they're working with the code in the system. In addition to that, we have everybody working on multiple things at the same time, and that introduces a level of complexity. As a developer finishes with the coding for a specific module, they hand it off to us for user acceptance testing. While that's going on, they're supporting that user acceptance testing. As we find bugs, they're busy fixing them, but they're also jumping into the next module on their list as well and starting on the coding for that. So that's what sort of creates those dependencies within the project. But we feel, and the developers have concurred, they have seen this new schedule as well, and we've worked together to come up with it. So we have a high level of confidence in the schedule that you're looking at. That said, as with all of life, there are always risks. We have enumerated some of those risks and accounted for a little bit of that in the project schedule. But then, of course, Sean has some contingency that is also within his control. And if anything really totally unexpected happens, then we would have to look at the whole schedule again. Do you have any questions about how we put this together?
Makes sense now with the colors, so.
Okay.
So, a couple things. So, Jane's been our project manager on Interest since the very beginning, and so we look at this. Actually, she updates this schedule every week, and every Monday morning we have a project steering team meeting. And so it's not like we haven't known we're falling behind. We've been aware of that. It's been a matter of we wanted to get closer to the end so we can really just try to pinpoint when can we reasonably expect to be done with this, so we're only rebaselining this one last time. Because I have to take all this and report it to the Legislative Finance Committee. So we've already rebaselined once, because originally we were going to be done like in October of this year, correct?
Yep.
And then we rebaselined for January of 19 a while back. It's been quite a while ago now. And so that's all fine, and that first rebaseline didn't come at any cost. Essentially, we had enough budget authority originally with the contingency, we could cover it, and we would have been fine. If we were going to be able to be done by January, I wouldn't have to ask for any more money, but it's just evident at this point with the complexity of the system and as much time as the developers are spending on keeping the production environment running on a daily basis, there's not enough time left over for them to develop. And even if they were, we don't have the testing capacity to keep up with them if they were going any faster. So I think what Jane has put together as far as a time duration, I think it's reasonable. There is a little bit of cushion built in there, but not a lot. Just because we have things like holidays and like that, we're not going to have to work. So So with that, I just wanted to let you know before I forget, that Jane is planning to leave us here at the end of September.
August.
I think September sounds better.
Next
I keep trying to squeeze more. But so Jane is leaving, she's gonna retire essentially, right, Jane?
Yes.
And spend some time with her mother. So the contractor we're working with will replace Jane, but it certainly, whoever they bring in is not gonna do as great a job as Jane's done up to this point. So she has done a good job for us.
Thank you for everything.
We do appreciate it. She keeps us all in line, including Alfred and Roy, which we all need. So, okay, but based on the new schedule, the next thing we'll look at is the actual budget. And you can see our current budget is on the left-hand side. And so all total, we projected it would be a $1.28 million phase of the project, $900,000 of which was going to be operating and $375,000 for personal services. With the extension out to essentially December 1st of 2019, it's going to put the overall cost of this phase at $1.8 million, $1.1 million of which would be operating and $650,000 of which would be personal services. So there's just a couple things I want to point out. Alfred Monsgard and Associates, that is our developers, and so you can see their cost went from $472,400 to $515,900. But that $43,500, what that really is made up of is, by extending the project out essentially another year, they're going to end up coming to Helena 3 more times. So about a little over 20,000 of that is for 3 more travel trips for the 2 of them. And then there's a little bit of project change requests that we've already asked for and they've provided to us, included in that 43,000. So everything that we originally asked for, the price of that didn't change at all on the development side. The 43.5 is for additional travel and change requests that weren't in the original. So, okay, and then there's 2 other major cost drivers. One of which is the 2 contractors, both project management and test lead. The duration of the project is going to be longer than we thought, so for those two functions, which we have to have, you can see that the cost of that has increased. The other big cost driver is TRS staff time, which is all above in that $277,000. And I guess the thing I would say about that is we would be paying those costs regardless if the project was going or not. But since they do devote that much of their time to the project on a daily basis, we need to track the costs that way. So, I mean, really, if you wanted to sort of exclude the TRS staff time, you're looking at a $246,000 increase to the project to extend it out almost a year. So it's really not as bad as it might seem.
This does not include the additional amount for ongoing maintenance that we already agreed to.
It does not. That's part of our just normal day-to-day operations. The other thing, so we did zero out the Sabo Consulting for IB&B. I don't see any reason to ask for IB&B. We carried it forward because we didn't spend it all for the first phase of the project. There really wasn't a whole lot of value in that. So far, it's mature enough, I don't see the need for it. So we're going to zero it out and not replace that one. And then the contingency of $82,000, that was the original contingency on the project as a whole. I'm not asking you to increase or decrease, so just leave it the same. I hope, pretty hopefully we won't even have to touch it. The only reason we need to touch it now is if we approve additional change requests that aren't approved as part of this budget upgrade or budget update.
Looks good.
Good to know.
We need a motion.
We do need a motion on this one.
I move that we approve the new schedule and budget request for
A second.
interest.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye as well. Is there any public comment on that issue? Thank you for your work.
Yeah, and Once again, thanks to
Yes,
Jane.
thank you,
Jane, you've
Jane.
done a great job for us, we really appreciate it.
It has been a true pleasure, honestly.
Thank you very much. The next part is administrative business, and it looks like the investment report. Jeff, you've been busy?
I've been busy a couple months for several reasons, but you can see in the, in what was handed out earlier by Sean, an updated investment report. And it's stapled and separate from what you've got. The new format, if you look on the first page, partway down, that's where the long-term year, inception to date percentage is 7.76. You can see the current month is actually positive, that's good, it's 0.05. The year to date for this year is 8.82%, which is good for us to have going forward for sure. And you can read the specifics as you look at each of those pools if you wish. You can see the international equity has been a drag for about 3 months on returns for a variety of reasons, both political and not. We don't need to go into those. Also in your board packet, you can see the little crib sheet for the end of May as of 6/30. One thing I like to look at is moving from month to month and see the changes. Sometimes you gotta have perspective as well. From a school standpoint, the end of May compared to June, when it comes to revenues, is clearly a lot different because they're done taking contributions out of people's paychecks. It's all been forwarded. I noted, comparing the end of May to the end of June, that there's a decrease in market value for both teacher retirement and PERS. And we're fairly significant. There was a $7 million reduction in value from the end of May to the end of June. Certainly part of that has to do with paying out and not receiving some of the contributions, but clearly the market's been a problem. The up note, as I pointed out a little while ago, is the 1 month return is positive this month, certainly, but always a work in progress. The other issue clearly in front of the board was to recruit and hire a new executive director. The structure there, just keep in mind that the executive director is somebody that kind of oversees not only personnel issues, but also works with the CIO, the Chief Investment Officer, who is supposed to be the expert in the diversification and the actual funds and where we're headed. So we had 30 plus applicants, some quite good, others just put their name out there because they could. We had 10 individuals that we were going to interview by phone. One of those dropped out right before the call, but had phone interviews with 10 individuals. That was narrowed to 4 that had broad backgrounds. Some very specifically in investments in particular. Some had a broad background in retirement systems. So they had the knowledge background of why we would like them to invest the way they do, a defined benefit system moving. We ended up with 3 individuals after in-person interviews. One of those in-state and 2 of them from out of state. One from, the last job was in Pennsylvania at the Hershey Trust. And he had both backgrounds with boards, staff, pension systems,
And chocolate.
and chocolate. Yeah, and a lot of politics involved in those chocolate and investments as well. You know, very, very good candidate. Another individual was quite qualified as well. This happened to be a female, and she withdrew her name about a week ago. She had several other opportunities that were staring at her, and quite frankly, both of those two individuals from out of state would be having significant reductions in pay to come here. And, you know, in particular, the one from Hershey was certainly in a position where he could work wherever he wanted just because he wanted to work there. And so anyway, we haven't made a decision yet. We're scheduled Monday by conference call for me and others who are in town to meet and deliberate between the last two individuals. So next week there should be a decision.
Thanks for sitting on that, because that's just an extra.
That was a lot of time, wasn't it? Diane is on the board of investments now as well.
A lot of time. A lot of time.
I think we were here 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago for 4 days. Yeah.
Thank you for your service. Absolutely.
Both of you.
Budget status report, you got a quick one for us, Molly?
Yes.
You get 2.2 seconds.
Be very brief.
I'm kidding.
Madam Chair, members of the board. So we're looking at the budget status. So I guess the first page there is the M-Trust Phase 3 budget status, and that's the, keep in mind, as of June 30th, before the budget amendment that you just passed. So you're gonna see like a deficit showing, but obviously with the new budget amendment, it would show a projected surplus. But these expenditures to date are accurate, and as of June 30th, we did moved the expenditures into working capital, and you'll see that on the financials once they're produced. Not much more to say about the project. Everything is kind of on track as it should be. Just it's going to be extended. Any questions on the M-Trust Phase 3 budget? As far as operating budget status report, this is also as of June 30, 18, and when I produced this, we actually weren't officially closed with the Sabres, the fiscal year. So we anticipated there could be other expenditures, but I've checked that, and so these numbers are final. There were no other expenditures. So this is how our budget turned out for the year. We expended about $2.35 million for the fiscal year. And we had the budget in fiscal year 18 of 2.6 million. So we spent about 90% of our budget for the year, which gave us a surplus. We did have like pretty close to full staff all year. There's very few vacancies, but the majority of that surplus came from our contracted services. I think we spent a lot less in our actuarial for the GAD 60. I think they refined their process, and we refined ours to the point where they're not charging us as much, so that's a good thing. And then there was just some miscalculation, I guess, on the health insurance. When we present the budget to you, I won't go into details, but because of the Phase 3 budget for M-Trust, there was we didn't anticipate that as much of the health insurance was going to be charged to the Phase 3 budget instead of the operating budget. So that's why there's such a surplus there. But I think we got that ironed out for this next budget. So
We'd rather have a surplus.
yeah, so it looks good. Everything looks good. I guess
It makes it a lot easier.
I guess the only thing I'd also point out to the board is that on at least the personal services, keep in mind that there are about 2.5 FTE that's charged being charged to the phase 3 interest budget that, we will eventually have to absorb into our operating budget. So, it looks as though we're spending, actually, if you look at fiscal year 17 expenses to fiscal year 18, our personal services expense went down, which, in all reality, it's not that way. I mean, there's a lot of it just being charged to the project at the time. So eventually you'll see that go up. And, other than that, any other questions on just the regular operating budget as it ended up for the fiscal year? There were no delinquent agencies, at least to our knowledge. We did the best we can to make sure everyone gets their reports in by June, their June reports in for the fiscal year before we close the pension administration system. And to our knowledge, they all got them in. In fact, we had a situation where someone got too much in. We had to adjust some of that, but that's there's always those reporting issues with all schools. So if you end up with just one or a couple, that's actually pretty good. So when you're talking about 360 employers, so nothing else to say on the budget unless you have any questions or comments.
Thank you. Everybody look at October 5th specifically, because that is when people coming.
So the actual will be around October 5th, and actually now, the next meeting will be next Wednesday, we talk about something.
Yeah.
So we'll get that publicly noticed at 3 p.m.
Yep. We're all just doing the phone.
And then the actual will be here to present the results of the evaluation on October 5th.
Those work for everyone?
Yes, that's good.
And then December 5th, just put it out, or 7th, just put it out there. That you have that on your calendar as well before you make really cool plans.
For the telephone meeting, did we just want to call?
So I'll set up a conference bridge.
And then email us with what to
And
do.
then you'll get the number, I'll email you what to do. I won't be here for that meeting, but Denise will be. It should be fairly quick, I would think.
So if you have any questions next week about what you need to do, give me a call.
And then we wanted to ask a question, it's not on here, the information item, but who is interested in the annual conference?
I am, but I already told Sean I need to wait a few days to know for sure if I can make it. And, Wisconsin,
I just went to the the trustees conference in San Francisco. Well, it was in Berkeley, and it was wonderful. I mean, honestly, it was the best one I've been to, but I also am not a new trustee. They did not spend a ton of time talking about retirement. They spent a lot of time, but it was about half and half, and it was other factors that are affecting the economy and retirements, and the quality of instructors there were phenomenal. PhD in this, 2 PhDs from Cambridge, from Harvard, from Stanford, from Berkeley, it was wonderful. And 2 of the things that were just interesting to me was that they talked about the opioid crisis and how it affects our economy and, everything really. And the statistics that this man brought in were, so far to the point where my son got his wisdom tooth out and I was like, no, he gets Tylenol and that's it. I don't care. I don't care how bad it hurts. Dry socket, don't care. So yeah, it was affecting. Oh, it was really great. And then this other man, and I was telling Sean I bought his book, Vivek Wadhwa is what his name is, and he would talk all about technology and how that there's this new boom on its way. And it's really going to take out things like doctors, teachers. Within the 10 to 15 years they're projecting. The accountant's gone. Just things you don't need anymore. I'm like, wow.
I would hope for that.
I hope lawyers will help.
One page on
Lawyers
that.
were on the list.
What about
Lawyers.
us? I'm gonna grab.
What really was cool is he's a part of some group that has invented this thing that you put on your arm, literally, like not just an iPhone thing, but, and it literally has all of your medical history attached to it. He's not going to sell it in the United States. Doesn't want to have anything to do with the United States, but they've already used it in India. It's for healthcare in these other countries. So they actually have healthcare, and it takes your blood. It literally, it was the craziest thing. Super interesting though. How many things are out there that I had no idea. That's why I bought his book, because I was like, wow. I thought I was aware, clueless. And of course, we're in the technology capital of the universe. He had driven there in a driverless car, and you know, yeah. And he showed us his Facebook, you know, where I had no idea this existed either, but Facebook can show you where you've been during the day.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, it was great.
Several other groups.
In case you forgot.
Yeah, and I didn't know, but yeah.
I saw something similar to that.
That's the tractor teenager.
Sean, can I ask a question? I've committed to a 1 o'clock meeting in Anaconda that's also very important. Do you guys have enough for a quorum for the disability meeting decision?
Yeah.
If it's okay, I'm gonna take off.
Yes,
I'm right,
that's
sorry,
right.
I'm really sorry, but I will see you in October. And I'll call you in a couple of days.
I guess, so Dan doesn't need to be on the conference call next week, does he?
No, he does not.
I can't be, actually. Okay. See ya.
Drive carefully.
You did.
Thank you.
Okay, on disability?
Yes, so
We're done?
we'll need to close the meeting.
All right, we'll open the meeting back up. Just talking about Mrs. Kramer's disability. We need a motion.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the disability application for Mrs. Kramer. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye as well. Now we just need a motion for an adjournment. So moved.
Second.
And second it, all those in favor indicate by saying aye. Chair votes aye.